Okay, this meeting will come to order. It is 6:31, and this is the regular session of the Bloomington Common Council for Wednesday, October 21st, 2020. Will the clerk please call roll? You're muted, Madam Clerk.
Saw that.
There you are.
Sorry. Councilmember Rallo?
I am here.
Scambaluri?
Here.
Rosenberger?
Here.
Sims?
Here.
Volin?
Here.
Piedmont Smith?
Here.
Flaherty?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
And Sandberg?
Here.
All 9 members are here, and they're welcome, and it's good to see them all. Here is a summation of tonight's agenda. We will have approval of several sets of minutes from earlier this year. We will hear reports from council members, from the mayor and city offices, and we are expecting a report from planning and transportation. During that segment, we will hear reports from council committees and reports from the public. 20 minutes will be set aside for each set of reports if necessary. We will hear appointments to boards and commissions, and then we will hear legislation for second reading. We have Ordinance 2017 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending Chapter 15.26 entitled Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program by replacing the Neighborhood Traffic and Safety Program with the new Traffic Calming and Greenways Program. Then we will go to legislation for first reading, and that will include Ordinance 2018 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending Chapters 15.12.010 Stop Intersections to add several stop signs, 15.12.030 Pedestrian Hybrid Beacon Signals to add a hybrid beacon signal, 15.32.080 No Parking Zones to add several no parking zones, 15.32.100 Loading Zones to delete several loading zones, 15.32.100 Loading Zones to add a loading zone, 15.37.020 Applicability to delete several streets from Zone 8, and 15.37.050 Fees to add a provision about the timing of permit sales. Ordinance 2020 to amend Title II Administration and Personnel of the Bloomington Municipal Code to establish a Community Advisory on Public Safety Commission. Ordinance 2026, an ordinance authorizing the acquisition, construction, and installation by the city of Bloomington, Indiana of certain extensions and improvements to the city's sewage works utility, the issuance and sale of revenue bonds to provide funds for the payment of the costs thereof, and the collection, segregation, and distribution of the revenues of such sewage works and other related matters. And Ordinance 2027 to amend Title 10 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Wastewater. We will then go to additional public comment period. We will take up matters of council schedule, and then we will adjourn. With that, we will now go to approval of minutes.
Mr. President, I move approval of the minutes of February 19th as amended, March 4th as amended, July 22nd as amended, and October 7th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the minutes?
Yes.
Sorry?
I just
Madam
want to point out
Clerk.
that there was actually a very small change made to the minutes of October 7th between the time that I sent them out in the packet and to when I sent them out to you all earlier.
Is it a scrivener's error or is it a substantive change?
It was a minor change, but since a couple of them were just minor changes, I think it might be appropriate to call it as amended with the others.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Madam Parliamentarian?
Yes, so I'll just revise my motion to say that the minutes of October 7th, 2020 were also amended.
Thank you.
Mr. Sims, would you second, please? You're muted, but Well,
Second.
you can unmute. Thank you. Somebody.
Second,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we will go to the clerk for a roll call vote on the motion to accept the minutes as all 4 minutes as amended. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Scambalori,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Bolin,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
and Rollo.
Yes.
Okay.
That motion is passed. Those minutes are accepted or approved. We go now to reports from council members. Are there any reports? I'm going to start in my bottommost right-hand corner with Councilmember Flaherty.
No report this evening. Thank you.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
No report.
Councilmember Smith.
I'd like to report that a great thing happened in our neighborhood. A man named Dick Scott turned 99 years old. And so the neighbors got together. We walked over to his house on Tuesday and sang happy birthday to him. And then he told us, he regaled us with stories of some of his 99 years. And I think we're all so serious a lot of times and talk about hard things. This was a great thing. And we said next year, we told him we're going to blow his house up because we're going to have a giant party for him next year because this year we had COVID. So anyway, happy birthday, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. The Greeks say, may you live to be 100. So maybe we should wish for him to live to be 110 or so, but more power to him. Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
No report, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
I would just like to say happy birthday to Mr. Scott as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rollo.
Happy birthday, Mr. Scott. And he was around for the first pandemic, by the way, apparently.
Oh my God.
I just wanted to mention that.
Good point.
He was quite young. He probably doesn't remember. Just to say that I think it's really prudent that we continue non-pharmaceutical interventions, which is a fancy word or phrase for masking up, social distancing, washing hands. Have I frozen?
No, we can hear you fine. Keep
Are
going.
you good?
Okay, keeping your hands away from your eyes and mouth, and because the likelihood is high that with cold weather bringing people indoors, we may experience another wave of SARS-CoV-2. So it's important to reduce the transmissibility, and the way to do it is masks and social distancing. So we ought to be vigilant about that. That's all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councilmember Rollo. Councilmember Scambaluri.
No report this evening. Thank you.
Councilmember Sandberg. I can't say your name.
Thank you. And speaking of birthdays, it's always great to celebrate birthdays, especially ones in the future. As you know, I was an early supporter of the Captain Janeway project, and that has come to fruition. The money has been raised and the statue has been carved, and it's going to be unveiled Saturday at 11 o'clock, right near Wonder Lab along the Beeline Trail. And of course, for those of you who are not Star Trek Voyager fans, Captain Janeway will be born in Bloomington on May 20th, 2336. And so we're going to start that party a little bit early and commemorate the unveiling of the statue. That will be done in a socially distant manner. Everyone will be wearing masks. It will be live streamed for people who are not able to attend. And for those of you who do feel comfortable going out along the Beeline Trail and the beautiful outdoors, feel free to join the celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sandberg. I want to echo that. I found myself discussing that issue at least a year ago with both groups that were interested in it. I'm glad they joined forces and they made that happen. So more power to us all. I've been to Riverside, Iowa, the future birthplace of James T. Kirk. So, and I cannot believe that I admitted that. Anyway, my turn for a report. Two things I wanted to say. One was I appreciate my colleagues covering for my absence last week at the budget. I regret not being able to be there. Had I been there, I would probably have voted no in the same way that I had voted at Committee of the Whole. But like that does not mean that I somehow disagree with every aspect of the administration's policy. In fact, just yesterday, I spoke before the County Council questioning the merit of the proposed new budget of the Monroe County Fire Protection District, because I compared it to the Bloomington Fire Department's budget and asked the question, what are they getting for their money? Because their budget is similar, if not identical in size to ours, but we put at least 10% more personnel on the ground and 30% more firefighters on the ground for the same money. We have an ISO rating of 2, and we're regarded as one of the top 1% departments in the state. So certainly that is a compliment to the Hamilton administration and the fine work done by Chief Moore, the Bloomington Fire Department. I will say that I did not find Chief Dillard's responses to my answers entirely satisfying. In fact, I still believe that the budget is excessive for what they're proposing to do. I was not proposing that the city actually take over that service. I simply said, if the Monroe County Fire Protection District Board of Trustees were to ask the city to contract, to propose a contract for that service, I think that we could put more personnel on the ground and provide as good or better service out there. That's just to highlight the differences between the two entities. So, if there's anybody who thinks that somehow it's not, if it's just about taxes, I think that that the budget that they proposed is misleading. I think that there's a certain amount of spite that the people outside the city want to show us. They, anything except being annexed into the city is better, even if it means they're going to spend extra for fire service that we do more efficiently. We do for a better price. So anyway, I'm looking forward to working with Chief Moore to, study the issue more, to compare line by line, frankly, how their budget works compared to ours. I know that there are a few things that are different, but 81% of each budget in the FPD and here BFD is devoted to personnel. And, we have a top-notch department. I can't figure out why you would need to spend more on that. Not that firefighters don't deserve more, but there's also, like the reality of what it costs to live in this market. Not necessarily the same as in other markets. At any rate, I, still continue to question the wisdom of that budget. And in general, I want my county colleagues to know that despite my questioning of it, my goal is to work with the county and not against it. And I wish we could come to some kind of an agreement with respect to fire, with respect to any other service between city and county, of how we can work together better and cooperate. I said enough. I thank you all for that. Well, let's go now to reports from the mayor and city officers.
Mr. President, could I add something?
Yes, sir. Mr. Rallo, please go ahead.
Well, I just want to follow on Councilmember Sandberg's comment. And I think Captain Janeway is going to be a significant member of the Federation. And I hope that we all realize that we're putting ourselves in the sights of the Romulans by having that marker, but I think it's well worth the risk.
We got a meeting to run here, Mr. Rallo. Thank you, though. Thank you for that. Those very wise words. Yes, live long and prosper, Councilmember Sandberg. Let's go now to reports from the mayor and city offices. I believe who is here to present from planning? Is that correct? I understand that there's a comprehensive plan update
Yes,
tonight.
sorry. Beth
Sorry.
Rosenbarger.
Beth Rosenbarger, welcome. Please state your position as well so we know who we're talking to.
Sure. Beth Rosenbarger, Planning Services Manager with the Planning and Transportation Department.
Thank you.
And let me go ahead. Okay. Are you all seeing my, great.
Yes.
All right, so let's get started. Do a timer. Okay, so like I just said, I'm Beth Rosenbarger, Planning Services Manager, Planning and Transportation Department. And we're here tonight to present some data that we have compiled based on recommendations from the comprehensive plan. We have the whole long-range planning team with us tonight. So this is a very collaborative presentation. Let me briefly introduce each team member. We have Amir Farshi, long-range planner, Keegan Gulick, zoning and long-range planner, and Mallory Rickbile, bicycle and pedestrian coordinator. As you all know and are familiar with, our favorite long-range city document, the comprehensive plan is our long-range plan for land use, transportation, and development in the city. It is a guiding document. We see it come up a lot when we're talking about plan commission decisions, but this is an overarching document that impacts all areas of the city. So we're here tonight to really focus on some metrics within that plan. So the comprehensive plan has 37 goals in it, and those are outlined across 6 chapters. Each chapter also has outcomes. So the outcomes tell us if we're on track with the goals, then it should look like this, and this is the outcome we would see in the community. The outcomes themselves then have a list of indicators, which are metrics we can use to measure if we are living up to that outcome. So tonight we're going to present 14 indicators, and we intend to do this annually with more indicators as well. And we think this is important to do because this would, if we didn't check in, that would be like setting off on a road trip for the West Coast and not checking your Google Maps until you should have arrived. So you always check back in to make sure you're following and on path, and that's what we're here to do this evening. For each of the indicators we have here, we've used a lot of data sources, but mostly the US Census and the American Community Survey, also Monroe County Assessor data, and some data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you have any questions about the data, happy to answer that, and we will 100% make these slides available to you and post them online. Mallory.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. So the first outcome we'll be looking at is, to what extent does the transportation network support all travel modes for people of all ages and abilities? The indicator that we're looking at is the percentage of people who are walking to work, biking to work, taking transit to work, and percentage of people who are driving alone to work. So we created this chart of commute to work trends 2000 through 2017. And I should say that these data are from the US Census and the American Community Survey, and they represent over 33,000 workers in Bloomington. So these are people who are going to work. And as you can see from this chart, we are seeing that the vast majority of people are driving alone to work. Most recently, our data show that 63% of people are doing this. We do see smaller incremental change in use of public transportation, walking, taxi cab, motorcycle, bicycle, or other means, and working from home. Next slide, please. And so what we have done is we have taken the mode data and we have decided to splice it into demographic differences to show how do these compare across demographics such as income, like the slide you're seeing now, race, and gender. So this graph shows the commute mode by income level for people who are driving alone and people who are taking transportation or public transportation to work. And so if it were equally distributed, you would expect expect the chart on the left to match the chart on the right. However, you can see the bottom 3 brackets comprise most of the area of the chart on the right-hand side. And that is because this confirms what we had suspect to already be true from national data, which is that public transportation serves people who have the lowest income in our community. And indeed, 84% of the people who use public transportation for commuting make less than $25,000 per year. Next slide, please. Then we've decided to analyze these data by race. So to orient you to the next 5 charts, we do have the purple bar, the lighter blue bar, the 63%. Those that will be the same across all of the different slides. So that is the standard to which this is the aggregate data. So this is the standard to which we're comparing the different race demographics that we have information for. So as you can see on this chart, white residents drive alone slightly less. They carpool slightly more than the aggregate data, and they have the ability to work from home or telecommute. So this is from 2010, than the aggregate data. Next slide, please. Our next most populous race, we have Asian residents, and we see that there's a significant fewer number of residents who are driving alone to work and significant more residents who are using public transportation for their daily commute. Next slide. For Black or African American residents, we see there's a significant difference between the use of public transportation and slightly difference in walking and the ability to work from home. Next slide. For Hispanic and Latino residents, we see a significant difference between number of people who are walking to work and taking taxi cab, motorcycle, or bicycle. Next slide. And then finally, the last demographic for which we have data available shows 2 or more races or some other race as defined by the census. And we see that there are slightly more people who are driving to work within this category and significantly lesser people who are carpooling and working from home. Next slide, please. So then we've decided to take these data and look at them of commute mode by sex, gender, and we see that carpooling is the category with the largest difference between male and female. Women tend to carpool and walk more, whereas men bicycle and take public transportation more.
Okay, thanks. So the next indicator we're looking at is estimated household transportation cost. And this data comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey. And all of the following data will be from 2011 estimate numbers. So this is a map of Bloomington broken down by census block group and broken down in terms of the annual household transportation costs. So it goes a little bit from low to high. So the green areas spend up to $6,000 a year, blue 6 to 8, and then we have 8 to 10 for the mustard yellow, 10 to 12 for the orange, and 12 to 14 the small magenta slice. That doesn't tell us a lot without knowing how much does somebody have to spend. So we take that and divide it by annual median income. So the household income to see what percentage is going toward transportation. In this one, again, census block groups and the same source of data. So we see it changes dramatically in terms of the green areas spend less than 10% of household income on transportation costs. The blue areas 11 to 15%. And then in the yellow, orange, and pink, it's anywhere from 16 to 57% of household income. Now, so this just gives us a little bit of the basis of that in terms of annual median household income, 2011 data. This is based on US Census data. And so we see in the pink, these households in these areas are, the median income is under $21,000 a year, orange 21 to 35, the mustard yellow 35 to 45, the blue is 45 to 70, and the green is the highest income category of 70 to 112,000 for median household income. So this data is a little bit layered, what I'm walking you through. So then we look at housing and the cost of housing as a percent of income. It's generally considered that a household is housing cost burdened if they're spending more than 30% of household income on housing. Typically, we want to actually see that number of housing plus transportation, and the best case would be plus energy costs. We don't have that, but there'll be more in a second. So a different indicator, we forgot to list it, is how many households are housing cost burdened. So you'll see in this chart, actually only the green areas and the blue areas are below 30%. So under 30% of the household income going toward housing. In the yellow, we see 31 to 40%. And in the orange through the pink, it's from 41 to 118. So more than people are bringing in. So finally, we look at housing plus transportation costs as a percent of income. And it's just nice, I think, to be able to break them down each before you see the total. But so I think a good rule here would be 40 to 45%. So the green areas are 40% of income is going toward housing plus transportation. The blue areas 41 to 56. And then from there, the yellow is 57 to 72% in these areas. And the orange is 73 to 107. So already over 100%. And the pink is all over 100%. So 108 through 172%. Compared to the median income for that census block group. Okay, next we have Amir.
Thank you, Bess. Hello, I'm Amir. For the outcome of public streets and rights of way have positive public health impacts, we have one indicator. The indicator is the percentage of transit stations and vehicles that are ADA accessible. Next slide, please. Based on Bloomington Transit bus stop inventory completed over the summer of 2019, overall accessibility of transit stations are ranked in 4 categories. 91 bus stops are ranked fully accessible, 195 bus stops are ranked nearly accessible, landing zones with some grass, sidewalks with minor cracks, lack of shade or seating are some of the characteristics of a stop in this ranking. 161 bus stops are ranked difficult to access. These are often able to be utilized by a person with disability, but pose significant challenges. These stops may have a lack of curb cut on one side of the sidewalk, a gravel landing zone, or protruding object, making the path of travel difficult. 83 bus stops are ranked inaccessible. These are inaccessible to people with disabilities and most often challenging to access for those without a disability, mainly because of the lack or condition of a sidewalk leading to a stop. And 100% of Bloomington transit buses are ADA accessible. Next slide, please. The other outcome is public parking demands are managed efficiently and effectively to an optimum level of 85% of supply. Next slide, please. The indicator is 2 active downtown public parking garages and residential neighborhood parking permit zones utilization rate. Next slide, please. In order to calculate the monthly parking garage utilization rate, staff calculated the average number of occupied spaces in each month and divided it to the total number of parking spaces in each garage. Due to the students' absence in the city, Public Works does not conduct parking space counts of June, July, December, and conduct partial parking space counts of May, August, and November. The highest utilization rate in 2019 was in March. It was 84% for Morton Street Garage, and it was 72% for Walnut Street Garage in March 2019. Next slide, please. To calculate the residential neighborhood parking permit zones occupancy, the staff used the number of parking permits sold in each zone in fall semester 2019 and divided that number to the estimate number of on-street parking spaces in each zone. Each resident of a single household detached dwelling in a neighborhood zone shall be entitled to apply for 1 residential neighborhood zone parking permit. Zone 4 has 101% of residential parking permit occupancy. Since the number of resident parking permits sold in Zone 4 was more than the estimated number of on-street parking spaces in Zone 4. Some eligible residents buy neighborhood parking permits, and they do not always park on on-street parking spaces. Sometimes they park on driveways and other parking spots. And next slide is for Keegan.
There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so the next outcome we wanted to look at was increased diversity in neighborhoods. Next slide. And the indicator for that is Neighborhood Diversity Index to view changes to racial and ethnic diversity in neighborhoods over time. Next slide. So here's the racial composition of Bloomington based on 2010 data. We chose to start with 2010 data to establish a baseline for future analysis so that we can look at the racial and ethnic changes over time. Also, the decennial census is the only time that a complete count is done. So we're really looking forward to the 2010 census data. It'll be really important for future analysis for looking at how Bloomington demographics are changing. But you can see here that we have broken down by race and compared to the city of Bloomington as well as the state of Indiana and the United States as well. We see that Bloomington is 81.4% for white alone. Asian alone is 9.9%. Black or African American, 4.3%. And 2+ races or some other race is 3.9%. Next slide, please. For the ethnic composition of Bloomington, we chose to look at the percent of the population that identifies as Hispanic or Latino. And you can see here that we have Bloomington is 4.1% Hispanic or Latino, compared to the state of Indiana, which is 7.3%, and the rest of the United States is at 18.5%. Next slide, please. And those charts are important for giving us context for when we look at the how race is distributed spatially throughout the city of Bloomington. And so here we have the percent of population that is white by census block group. And you can see that even though Bloomington was 81% white, we have some block groups that are as high as 98% white, which is represented by the dark blue color on the map. And we have a few more maps. I'll just go through them, and they will be available afterwards as well. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, it's this slide. This is the percent of population Black or African American by census block group. Even though Bloomington is around 4.3% Black, we do have some census block groups that are around 13% Black. You can see in the dark blue census block group on the west side of town. Next slide, please. For percent of population Asian by census block group, even though Bloomington is 9.9% Asian, we have some census block groups that have concentrations at 29% or 51%, which is the dark blue census block group on the east side of town. Next slide, please. And for the final map, we have percent of population Native American or American Indian as the census defines it by census block group. This population is less than 1% of Bloomington's total population, but we do have some census block groups with higher populations at 1 to 3%, which is the darkest color. Next slide, please. For the next outcome, we have improved access of neighborhood housing to community amenities, employment, and essential services. And the indicator is the number of parks within a half mile by US Census block group. Next slide, please. So this map is just a map of park facilities with a half-mile buffer around them. And I think this map gives us a good idea of what people's proximity to parks is like throughout the city. We hope to do more analysis on this in the future to take into account things like the road network or other modes of transportation to give us a bigger idea of what access to parks looks like throughout the city. But you can see that most parts of the city are within a half mile of a park. So that's definitely really important. And this does also have the golf courses in there as well, just as a note. Next slide.
Okay, so I will be leading off the next outcome, which is increase the range of affordable housing options that are universally designed and environmentally sustainable. Next slide, please. The indicator we're looking at is percentage of dwelling units occupied. So here we have a map of the city, and you can see that less than or equal to 85% of the dwelling units occupied is shown in the northeast side, and that's in the gray. And then we have 85 between and just 90%, which is the orange. And then the yellow color is 90 to 95% of dwelling units occupied. And finally, the blue indicate spaces where there's between 95 and 100% of dwelling units occupied.
Thanks, Valerie. So the next indicator is neighborhood housing type diversity index. Next slide, please. And so to show this, we wanted to make a map to help visualize, what housing type diversity looks like in Bloomington, and to help show how we use land for residential purposes and how that might affect the options that people have for housing. And this data comes from the Monroe County Assessor, and that's where their categories came from as well. This is housing type by parcel. And you can see the blue is a single family, the green is duplex and triplex, the light blue is 4 to 19 units per parcel, the yellowish color is 20 to 39 units, orange is 40 plus, and the pink represents condominiums, which have their own category from the assessor. So that's why they appear as separate from the others. And another thing to note is that this doesn't show all of the mixed use housing units throughout the city. Some of the labeling was inconsistent on the data, so we did not include it in this, but we still think that this gives a good idea of what housing type diversity looks like throughout the city. And we zoomed in on a few of the neighborhoods here, just to give you an idea of what housing type diversity looks like in certain parts of the city. So we have the Broadview neighborhood, McDowell Gardens, and Bryan Park. And these boundaries, the red boundaries, come from a GIS layer that just is the neighborhood association boundaries. Next slide, please. So here we have closer to downtown, we have Prospect Hill, near West Side, and Maple Heights neighborhoods, for example. And finally, we have the Elm Heights, East Side, and Barclay Gardens area. And we just hope to look at this more in the future to see how housing type diversity affects our options for housing throughout the city. Next slide.
Okay, that's our presentation. Thank you so much. The comprehensive plan is a living document that we, at some point we'll be happy to update, but we want to keep track of it. It's available online. We will post this presentation and we will directly email it to council also. So we're going to continue to track this. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Rosenberg, and everybody in planning and transportation who made that presentation. If you could unshare your screen briefly so I can see who has questions. We may have to put the slides back up if there's a question that relates to it. Are there members with questions for the planning and transportation team about this? I see Council Member Scamboluri, Piedmont Smith, and then Rallo in that order. Councilmember Scamboluri.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. That was fascinating and helpful. Could you talk a little bit about how you studied campus housing in that mix? For example, I noticed that the North Jordan Extension Greek houses listed household incomes as, I think, greater than 100 and something thousand, and their units occupied was kind of distinctive. So student housing on campus is kind of different. And I know Greek houses are not on campus, but that kind of presents a different kind of option in this town. Could you talk about how you approached measuring these indicators in that setting? Does that question make sense?
Yes. So it just depends on the census. So mainly students who fill out the census here are counted here, and we encourage them to do that as much as possible, you know, to count where your residence is 9 months or more of the year. And then, and also, I'm sorry, it is a thing I need to find a bit more out about. I know it's discussed in the comp plan, but I would say if there's not data, then what happens is the other averages for that census block group would prevail. You know, so if somebody doesn't answer, then it's going to be about the other answers that you do get. So when we looked at, let's see, this area, kind of the fraternity sorority row on the north side, there just are other housing groups within that. I guess it was just the census block group. So is probably based on those that did answer.
Okay, thank you. And may I ask another question, or do you want me to hold it for another
go ahead.
Can you go back to the slide about public transit stops and the number that are ADA compliant, the number that present challenges? So if I'm understanding this correctly, there are 286 stops that are nearly accessible. They might present minor challenges, and 246 that actually do present challenges. Am I understanding that correctly? The buses are accessible, but nearly half of our stops are presenting challenges.
Yeah, actually, 91 bus stops are fully accessible and 195 are nearly accessible. So these two categories are good enough. They try to actually making some progress, but and 161 bus stops are ranked difficult to access, and 83 bus stops are ranked inaccessible. So these two categories are the main challenges.
So 286 versus 244. Okay, that's a little worrisome. I will probably want to come back to that at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I'm just wondering overall what to make of this data. It looks like regarding the indicators you've addressed, that the data presented tonight is kind of the baseline. And we really need to come back in a few years and see if our comprehensive plan and our policies enacted on the basis of that plan have made a positive difference. Is that, am I interpreting that correctly? I mean, all this data, most of it is from 2010, so it's already old. So are we going to compare that then to the 2020 census in a couple of years and see what the trend is? Could you give me just an overall interpretation of what this is telling us in regard to our goals?
Yes, I agree. It's telling us the baseline. So, the comp plan was adopted in 2018. The comp plan used some 2010 census data, but the census, it doesn't provide a count for everything we have in the plan, but it's the best for a lot of the things. So that's correct, that we will want to update it and see where we're moving. So even some of the specific indicators are like changes over time. So we need to look at that over time since the comp plan has been adopted and not just this one snapshot. Correct.
So are there any indicators we can already, I mean, not tonight, but are there any indicators that we could already have some change data on in the last 2 years?
Probably. Yes. I forget the total number, 100 or 200 something indicators. Amir, if you know the number, that'd be great. So what we're trying to do is at least start tracking them. And this is just a first round, but yes, we're going to be looking to bring the comp plan indicator data together to keep it and house it more in one place in order to report on that. So I think there are some, but these were just, honestly, we chose to focus on housing and transportation because at least as planners, that's our bread and butter. And we can focus on what we know before we start to also ask other departments to provide us data, because we alone can't get all the data for sure.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Rallo.
Well, my question was similar, I guess. I noticed that a lot of the data was 3 or even 10 years old. And so is it likely that we're going to have, say, next year, a better view of change? And will there be a future where there was no reference to goals? There were just indicators here. Is there going to be another report that refers to whether the change is, evolving toward goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So it will depend when the 2020 census data is available in terms of when we could do an update on these specific data and indicators. But basically, yes, I would anticipate that we will be making another and more reports to try to keep track of either where we're starting or where we are or how much has changed. And it depends on the particular data set for each variable, honestly, in terms of how much we can measure change and at what points in time we can measure change. In terms of goals, I mean, yes, I think part of that is that we need to use the data as a window into our goals. So if one goal in the plan in the transportation chapter is to prioritize non-automotive modes. So when we look at our commute to work trends, it doesn't just say in the comp plan, this is what it will look like if you prioritize non-automotive modes. It says what the outcome would be and then different ways to measure it. So I think what we can do our best on is providing that data and providing an assessment of that, but that I sort of think it's up to all of us a bit to say, are we really moving toward that goal, and try to keep track of it too.
So can I follow up just to ask, so the Bloomington transit data was from 2019, so that's real recent. And then there was, I think, data from the assessor that was relatively recent. So the data that we're relying on from census is done very relatively rarely. Should we prepare a budget for our own,
Ms. Rosenbarger, can I take this one?
Yeah, I don't feel honestly able to answer that, but I think it's a good thing to consider.
Councilor Barallo, the census, they do their work in the decennial year. They issue the first report beginning of the next year. We really don't see data until July of the following year, like granular data is starting to break it. Like their first goal is to apportion Congress. And then after that, everything else sort of filters down. But it can take 2 to 3 years for a complete data set from a decennial census to be released. And what Planning and Transportation has done is use some really some deep dive data here. And the last time it was done this deeply was basically between 2010 and 2013. The American Community Survey is kind of a sampling. It's an estimate of the census. They can't do everybody every year. They can't count everybody in every place. So, I mean, a good example is...
So I guess what I was getting at is, is it adequate? Or are we going to need to have our own means by which we poll or do a census to determine if we're meeting our goals? Because it seems to me the census isn't often enough.
Again, they're going to be able to give you better reports in 2022 and 2023 when the new data actually becomes available. For example, we're not going to be able to redistrict the city of Bloomington until 2022. It takes 2 years after the census to get the data in order to be able to do it. The county can't re-precinct the county until the end of 2021. So this all takes time. But what I would say, in fact, the question I have for planning staff is more about, back to Councilor Scamboluri's question about, if you look at can you put up a map again? Any of the maps that show the red in the center of the city. The area that Councilor Scamboluri pointed out about Fraternity Row, that they have that's it right there. The green area, the Jordan Avenue, what will soon not be called Jordan Avenue anymore. is an indication of a problem, which is that students, whether they're wealthy or not, tend not to report income, but they're counted at the census where they physically live. So the result is you've got people, I mean, we're looking at the center of town, which I don't think anybody here thinks is the lowest rent housing in town. And it shows as far and away as utterly poverty stricken, when it's really a reflection of students who don't report income, but who can afford the rent there because they're dependents for the most part. And it skews all the numbers. And I wonder if planning and transportation has thought about a way, because this is a perennial problem, because half the town is students. And so is it not creating indigestion for planning and transportation staff? Are you concerned about this sort of things? I mean, like anybody who thinks that everybody in the center of town is paying 108 to 172% of their income to live and travel there, I think that everyone would agree with me that that's not, that's probably inaccurate. So what do you guys say to that problem? Because I think that's a bigger problem than the age of the data.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a challenge. I guess I would first potentially not agree with the premise. I think we tend to tell one narrative of who a student is when there are also lots of narratives of who students are, where it might be that they have support from family. It might be that somebody is completely paying for their housing through student loans. And while that's an option, I don't know how many people on the council have student loan debt. It could be frustrating too. So I mean, the cost of housing is something they might be paying back for a long time too. So we just don't know. And I'll say, I think it's concerning, but I don't know how concerning it is when we know other parts of the city see the same challenges, when we know we have the highest cost of housing in the state. And so I don't know. So I think it matters. I don't have a solution to how we should look at that right now. I think it's something we have to continue to look at, but know that, just like we have a diversity of residents, we have students are residents too, and there's a really diverse range there as well.
I did not mean to paint students with a broad brush, of course. I recognize everything that you said, and I agree that it is relevant, and I don't know what to do about it either. But I think that to address Councilmember Rallo's concern, I don't think the age of the data is the issue. I think that one of the things I'd like to see IU do is collect local addresses from students for every academic year, so that we can figure out where students are actually living. Because if all the population of that downtown area is students, that's one thing. If it's only half, then maybe we're missing something because we assume that they're all students. So Councilman Rallo, I think you're right that there might be some benefit to a certain local collection of data.
Well, thanks for sharing your opinion, President Volan, but I'd still like to hear from the planners, maybe not tonight, but whether it would be justifiable to have our own data gathering and whether to budget for that in the future so that we can keep current.
I'll follow up. I think that's something I can ask about for sure. Of course, I can't decide that on the spot. And I think,
of course,
particularly for the comp plan, we would almost have to pick out, as far as surveys go, the shorter, the better. So we would really want to pick out what are the most important data that we think we want more frequently and that the census doesn't adequately capture maybe for us as a community.
That's what I was thinking. I didn't mean it as any critical judgment. You're working with the data that you have, and I just want to make sure that you have the tools that are necessary for you to be able to keep track.
Thanks for clarifying. I definitely didn't take it as critical to us.
Okay.
I think it's a neat idea. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Rallo, and nor did I. Any other members of the council who have questions? I'm having trouble seeing with the screen shared.
Sorry.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, how is it possible that a household can spend more money than they take in? I'm sorry. I'm looking at, households that spend 118% of their income on housing and transportation. Can you just explain how that comes about?
I don't know the answer. I mean, it is possible. Student loans, help from family. Also, all of these are medians and averages. So that means there's a range in there. But no, other than student loans, help from families, and other situations. Those are the best guesses I have right now.
Councilmember Smith.
I don't have a question. I just want to compliment you all on the display of the data, the review of the data, the analysis of the data. It provides us some really great baselines for informing what we're doing for the future. So thank you very much. This is the kind of data and review that speaks to me as far as making it, giving me information to make just good decisions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Any other comments or questions from members? Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I also want to thank Planning and Transportation staff for this data. And as Amir stated, I think there's 146 indicators, something like that in the comp plan. And we touched on, what, 11 tonight? I think that was it. And I guess that was a lot of information, and I could see the data you collected. But I guess I'm wondering trends. What trends do you see, and what is this telling us? It's like one of my colleagues said, 118% of your income. What does that tell us? And then you truthfully said, well, I don't know. I mean, that's just the data we have. But it would mean more to me to see what this information, what this data is actually telling us. And what are some of the trends? How are we assessing it? What are the analysis of that data? And maybe that will take a couple more years or so, but it would make more sense to me if I could see trends and where this is leading and what is it indicating. And at some point, from an income standpoint, I was thinking, how will the financial effects of this pandemic affect this data moving forward? And I know you don't know that right now, but again, if I'm confused now a little bit on what this is telling us, then how confusing is it going to be later? And I see some help. Some of it's helpful, but it's just not clear to me. And we can talk about it later, I'm sure, but thank you all for the report. No, those were just my comments, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Further comments or questions from members? Councilmember Sgambiluri.
Thank you. Ms. Rosenbarger, can you put this report in context of what we'll hear from you in the future? There are 146 total indicators. We looked at 14 tonight. Do you envision us looking at the same 14 a year from now and 2 years from now? Do you envision covering all 146 at some point? Can you put tonight's presentation in that context?
Yes. Definitely both. So yes, we plan to report back on these indicators as well as provide more baseline data and potentially trends, if available, on more indicators from the comp plan. I would say this year was we did 14 indicators in this presentation. This year was our first year, so we had I would just say there was more work that went into us kind of figuring out a process as a team and figuring out how we were going to do this, and that we feel really confident in doing a presentation next year that has more indicators in it. So it might not be next year that you see the update to these indicators, depending on when the data is available, but I would say, yes, we intend to do at least more indicators and updates. In terms of all 146, we've also gone through the list and tried to identify what we think we can't actually measure. And we'll try to provide that information as well. So we're not even sure that we can measure all 146, but we're identifying what we can measure either by getting the data ourselves or with other city departments or reaching out to community partners that might be measuring it. But yes.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. further questions, final comments? Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Just a quick request slash kind of future item. I was talking to a constituent recently who noted that even when slides are available after presentation, it's a little less useful to both council members and the members of the public at that point. And I sort of understand that staff probably wants as much time as possible to refine anything up to the end. But I'm wondering if in the future we could post any presentation materials from staff, whether it's a mayoral, administration report or report on legislation presentation. If we could post them as a packet addendum on the council's website, even 10 minutes before the meeting starts. That way, members of the public, council members could have downloaded them and be following along. Easier to kind of look back at, the details on a particular slide and be able to better articulate your question and that sort of thing. So I don't know if that needs a response necessarily. It is a request for staff and for council staff as well going forward, but I wanted to highlight it here so I don't forget.
Thanks. We're happy to consider that or, figure that out too.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the staff for all their hard work. I knew when we passed the comprehensive plan that all those indicators were going to be a lot of work for somebody. And I am glad that that staff has been able to take time to follow up on some of them to give us a starting point. And maybe we can talk at some point later about, if council members have priorities where they want to have data gathered, because 146, not all of those are going to get done. It's just not feasible. So I would be, pleased if council could somehow discuss with planning and transportation staff any priorities that they may have in obtaining data on one indicator or another. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other last minute questions or comments? I will say, I want to echo Councilmember Smith's idea that we had to start somewhere. The fact that city staff is doing this kind of research is fantastic. And I'm very, very happy and I've already learned a lot from some of the maps that I saw tonight. I think Councilmember Piedmont Smith's question justified Councilmember Rallo's query. We would benefit, I think, from targeted local data research in order to make better decisions, certainly for the reason that I cited, because students represent an unusual demographic that skews numbers in more ways than one. But I also want to emphasize that even though the census says 2020, the results of the census usually don't come for a couple of years. So, don't expect all the answers next year either. We might get more fine-grained data sets like the ones that planning and transportation staff are working with in 22 and 23. Metropolitan area data is usually delayed until the third year after. But you're my heroes for doing this. Thank you. Please keep it up. And the one last thing I'm going to say is I feel like this year's census was a catastrophe because the pandemic came right before Census Day. And for a college town like ours, the change of, did students fill out the census here? When did they fill out the census? I'm afraid that our numbers might fall, even though in, say, 2025, we'll be more populous than ever, but we won't be represented properly. So I'm gritted teeth hoping that the census proves to, because I am quite confident that the population of Bloomington has grown, and I'm afraid that it will show an apparent shrinkage, which will affect us for 10 years because of the way the census was conducted this year. So I hope that won't be, my worst fears won't come true, but we won't know for a couple of years yet. So thanks again, and it's time to move on. Thank you all for your presentation.
Thank you
Send
so
us
much.
those slides.
Yes, it was really a team effort. I know I answered all the questions, but thank you. And thanks to the whole long range planning team.
Thanks, team. All right, let's go now to reports from council committees. Do we have any? Seeing none, we'll go to reports from the public. If there's a member of the public who would like to address an item that's not on tonight's agenda, please use the raise hand function in Zoom or type into the chat. And I think Mr. Lucas tonight will be acknowledging speakers. Mr. Lucas.
Yes, first up we have Mr. Jim Shelton, who should be able to unmute himself.
Mr. Shelton, go ahead.
Good evening, Council. Jim Shelton with the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce speaking right now on behalf of CASAs, or Court Appointed Special Advocates. I want to update you and the community on our latest training session, which started on Monday. I'm very happy to report that the community has really stepped up to all the information that's been provided about the impact of COVID-19 on stresses to family. And we have 20 people who signed up for training that started on Monday. They should be having their second class right now as we speak. I want to thank you guys, the county council, and the commissioners for letting us speak at your public comment times to help get people aware of the need for CASAs and the situation that we're in. Hopefully, this will help take care of the 50 children that are waiting right now for CASAs. But sadly, this is just going to be the first step. The stress from COVID is going to continue. We really fear it's going to get worse as things like eviction freezes wear off and some of the special economic helps end. And then just the length of time that this has been going on is really wearing on families. And sadly, a lot of times that means the parents will turn to drugs or back to drugs. They will be neglecting their children, or they'll be so frustrated that they take it out on their children and physically abuse them. So with that bummer, I do want to thank everybody who has helped get this 20-person class together. I want to make sure everybody realizes that we will have a session again in the winter. It'll start February 9th. So I know there were a number of people who were thinking about this and just couldn't pull the trigger and do it this time. So they've got a couple of months to learn a little bit more. They can call 323-2272 and talk to the staff, or go online to monroecountycasa.org. Click on the volunteer link, and then you'll find a frequently asked question page. CASAs are really important to children who are in the system because they've been abused and neglected. Statistically, if a CASA is involved, the cases don't last as long. The kids are not in foster home as long. They're far less likely to ever have to come back into the system again. So I invite people to please think about this and look into it. Applications will be due sometime in the middle of January, which will be here before we know it. So thank you guys again for letting me use some of your time to talk to people, and thank all the people who volunteered to help recruit these volunteers who will actually work with the children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Appreciated. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak on an item not on the agenda? Please raise your hand in Zoom or type into the chat. Second call. Final call for public comment. And with that, we'll close public comment and move on to appointments to boards and commissions. Do we have any such? Seeing none, we'll move on to legislation for second reading. Madam Parliamentarian.
Yes, Mr. President, I move ordinance 2017 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Yes, Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Volin,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Scambolari.
Yes.
Thank you.
That motion is accepted. Will the clerk please read by title and synopsis?
Ordinance 2017 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending Chapter 1526 entitled Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program by replacing the Neighborhood Traffic and Safety Program with the Traffic Calming and Greenways Program. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance replaces the city's existing traffic calming policy, the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program, with the Traffic Calming and Greenways Program developed by the Planning and Transportation Department. The Traffic Calming and Greenways Program sets the standard for the prioritization and placement of neighborhood traffic calming and related traffic control devices and requires a consistent procedure for resident-led and staff-led processes. Your committee recommendation is do pass 4-0-0.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I move that ordinance 2017 be adopted.
Second.
Who is here to present
That would be me,
ordinance 2017? That would be,
Mallory Rickbile.
oh, Mallory Rickbile. Please go ahead.
Yeah, great. So hi, yes, my name is Mallory Rickbile. I'm here to, let me just start my timer. I'm here to present on the Traffic Calming and Greenway Program. This has been a project I've been working on for almost 2 years. So I'm delighted to talk to you about speed cushions tonight. So next slide, please. So here's what we're going to discuss. I'm going to give you some background information on what exactly we mean by slow streets, and I'm going to explain how slow streets are safer and more equitable. I'm going to discuss some of the processes involved with the current traffic calming program, the NTSP. I'm going to talk about the proposed traffic calming program and discuss why we need a resident and a staff-led process. And then we'll get into the weeds a little bit and talk about some of the program deliverables and internal considerations that we've had in the formation of this policy, and then have time for questions and comments. So what do we mean by slower streets? Essentially, we mean speed limit compliance or going the lawful speed, not breaking the law, not speeding. So why is that important? Is because speeding harms people. Slower streets are safer streets. Next slide, please. So many of the principles that I have that discuss how speed affects the severity and the likelihood of crashes are principles that stem from the laws of physics. So I don't have a background in physics, but if you do have any questions on some of these, I'd be happy to provide those information. But to keep it moving along, speed affects the severity and likelihood of crashes, which increases harm because they yield more force. More speed narrows the field of vision for the person who is driving. Speeding vehicles travel a greater distance before the brakes are applied. Speeding vehicles travel greater distances before stopping. And speeding vehicles are more prone to over and under steering. Next slide, please. And that's why we see this exponential relationship as to how the impact of speed affects fatal injury. As you can see on this chart, that is from the US Department of Transportation. At 20 miles per hour, a collision between a car and a pedestrian, we'd expect the fatality rate to be at 10%. However, if you increase that by 20 miles per hour, you see the fatality rises to 80%. And I also want to point out that while injuries that are not fatal, they are also very traumatic, and they can seriously impact one's mental, emotional health, financial health for the person who is harmed and their family. Next slide, please. We know that speeding harms people on local streets. And this is from the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration. And we see that speeding is involved in 37% of fatal crashes on local streets, which is 8 points higher than any other road typology. Next slide. So how did we get here? Essentially, neighborhood design post-1950 has created the perfect storm where speeding has become intuitive. So the chart that is on the top of the screen, you see a cross-section of an early 1900s residential street, which is characterized by a narrow street with a sidewalk and houses that are closer to the street. And below you see the development that was born of the post-World War II economic expansion, which is characterized by amplified curves. There's lots of parking, which is available on the street. However, there isn't a demand for the street. So for the demand for parking, which has resulted in parking that, or has resulted in streets that are very wide. We have setback houses, and this picture in particular has sidewalks included. However, in most divisions, there are no sidewalks and there are no alleyways. Next slide, please. So here we have some of this design as it exists in Bloomington. This is in Lexington in the Park Ridge neighborhood, just north of campus. And here you can see the setback houses, the amplified curves, the wide streets, the areas for parking that is often not utilized. Next slide, please. This is on Ulitic in North Bloomington, and you can see we have the same characteristics, and we have the residents who have taken it upon themselves to tell drivers to drive the speed limit of this area. Next slide. And this is Hawthorne, and you can see the difference. So we have parking that's on the side of the streets, but we do have a narrower street. And so cars that are approaching each other will likely slow down because they see that the road has become more narrow. Next slide, please. So why are slower streets more equitable streets? Next slide. So incomplete streets, which are the streets that we are discussing here, are known as ones that are designed with one user in mind, drivers, instead of a range of users, which we have in our community. A single user might, or it might not have been the intent of the person who designed the streets. However, that is the outcome that we are seeing. And what we see is that the incomplete streets are especially dangerous for people of color. The pedestrian fatality rate for Latino and African American is over 60 and 75% higher, respectively, than for white residents. We know that low-income communities are disproportionately affected by these streets. In counties where more than 20% of households have income below the federal poverty line, we see the pedestrian fatality rate is over 80% higher than the national average in those areas. I'm going to show you some local data in the next two slides that will show how this relationship occurs in Bloomington. Living near a major road or an area of high traffic density is associated with adverse health outcomes such as asthma, COPD, and cardiovascular disease. These factors are amplified when car-centric communities, which having access to nutritious foods, places to be physically active, require the use of the car. This will limit the ability for those who can't drive, who can't afford to drive, who don't want a car, or who are too young to drive, to be able to attain these resources without relying on someone else to provide them for them. And finally, we know that 60% of people who fall into the category of interested in biking for transportation but are concerned for their safety, a disproportionate number of these people who fall into this category are women. What would it mean for equity if we had streets that allowed two-car households to become one-car household, thereby reducing the yearly expenses, which on average constitutes between $7,000 and $9,000 per year? Next slide, please. So this is a map that we've overlaid housing and transportation cost as a percent of the median income. You may remember that one from before. The areas in red and orange indicate areas where there is less money at the end of the month once these expenses have been counted for. And the purple dots indicate crashes where a person has been injured. As you can see, the way that these data are dispersed, we see clustered areas in areas where the cost of housing and transportation constitutes a greater percentage of this income. Next slide, please. I then recently uploaded our 2013 through 2018 crash data for the Bloomington and Monroe County, where a pedestrian was involved, into what's called the spatial equity tool from the Urban Institute. And we can see that based on the spatial assessment of these data, it shows that census tract where low income residents live, renters, unemployed renters, and households with limited English proficiency are overrepresented in areas where crashes are involving a pedestrian. Next slide, please. So in 2012, there was a special committee on street design as it relates to the traffic calming policy, and they concluded that some of the key recommendations were to rewrite the NTSP, to reduce the process to 12 months, to make a review by the Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission, and to create a scoring system for potential projects. Sorry. Next slide, please. And then our comprehensive plan and our city supported goals also say that it is time to update the NTSP. Next slide, please. And so when I talk about the NTSP, I want to give you a little overview of this process. And this is more of a summation. I'm happy to go into more detail. However, just to kind of stay on track with time, I'll point out the key highlights. So there's only a resident-led process, and we know that the barriers to entry are very high, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just one moment. The current requirements favor residents who have the time and the privilege and the trust in the community that they will respond appropriately when they are bringing their concern about traffic calming to the forefront. And then metrics are not connected to any sort of outcome or any indication of the success of the metrics. So just to give you a sense, next slide, please. I talk about the application process and how that presents barriers. This application requires a meeting where the residents had to receive notice that the meeting was happening. It requires 2 signatures from City Council, and it requires 51% of affected households to sign the petition. So 2 years ago, when we tried to get traffic calming installed on Countryside, this required 146 signatures from the neighborhood, which would have not been possible without the efforts of a champion within the neighborhood who had the passion for traffic calming to be able to organize that group of people. Next slide, please. The next process in this policy is the public meetings and BPSC approval. And so the meetings generally start out between the engineering department and the neighborhood residents. And then there's also a meeting between the Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission and the residents as well. And in my experience, having both lived in an area and being the staff liaison through different portions of this in the Broadview neighborhood, which was tried to be passed 2 years ago, this is a point where it gets to be very difficult to build consensus because you have a lot of people who are entering at different times in the conversation, and the expectation that the city might be able to do something that is far more costly, such as the installation of sidewalks, usually is something that we can't do. Speed cushions are the most efficient and effective means that we have. And so it is difficult to get people excited about the idea of installing traffic calming when it is a speed cushion than a sidewalk. And so that made it difficult to build consensus around the time that is most important in this process. And that is the next step. Next slide, please. And that is the resident ballots. And this is the step that is very difficult for residents to be able to meet. And it requires 51% of eligible households to vote in favor. So this is not 51% of the ballots returning being in favor. this is 51% of all households must return those ballots, and those ballots must say that they are in favor of something that is as difficult to capture the hearts and minds of as traffic calming can be. So this exceeds any level of participation that we would typically see for any presidential election, much less speed bumps. And finally, this requires the approval from council and from the Board of Public Works. This is all theoretical because as far as the records that we have going back, I cannot find a project that has made it to this step following the process that I've laid out with Fidelity. Next step. So then we're creating a new policy, and we decide that we want to have two processes, a city-led process and a staff-led process. And this is for two reasons. Number one, it allows us to respond quickly to public safety concerns without having to wait for a neighborhood to be able to organize and have the meetings that are required. And also it allows us to implement the high priority bike network. And currently, both of these are impossible for the city to do the way that the current code and program are written. Next step, please. So that here we're starting with the resident-led process of the proposed policy, and this will run much like a grant. So the Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission, they're the green dots, they will work to release an evaluation methodology in November of every year. And this evaluation methodology will have two main areas that they will be looking at. Number one, the prevalence of vulnerable road users. So these are children, these are people over the age of 65. This is people who live in cost-burdened households, and as well as incidents of behaviors that are likely to cause harm. So that is speed data, that's crash data, is there a presence of sidewalk, things of that nature. So once this evaluation methodology has been created and released to the public, we'll request projects from the public with a special emphasis on reaching out to neighborhood associations and people who have emailed me about speeding in their neighborhood. I tend to get about 3 to 5 of these every week, or have submitted a U report about illegal speeding behavior in their residential neighborhood. I will be reaching out to them to let them know that the grant cycle is opening and we're looking for projects. When we receive applications, we'll notify affected households, network users, and invite them to attend a project hearing, much like the process that we have for a plan commission project. And then from there, the high-ranking projects for which we have the resources to fund will go to installation, evaluation, and the final stage, where there will be a report that will show with transparency the effect of the program has on reducing speeds in residential neighborhoods, and be able to inform other residents of the benefits of these installations. Next slide, please. The staff-led process is a little more streamlined, and ultimately that is because the projects that are intended for this process have been selected through the 2019 transportation plan, which is the high priority bike network. There may be cases where we may need to respond to an issue that we find, but in the large part, these projects are already picked out for us. So in this process, we will notify the households. We'll have design meetings where we'll meet with affected housing units and network users. In the instance that it's a greenway, there will be an open comment period for the public to submit questions, comments, thoughts. And then again, much like the resident-led process and any plan commission project, it goes before a body to review. And in this case, it's the Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission. From there, proposed projects which are able to be funded and installed will be installed, evaluated, and reported upon. Next slide, please. So the program deliverables, I've gotten a lot of questions about what will this look like on a yearly basis. So what we envision is that we will spend about $50,000 of our alternative transportation funds on traffic calming. And so that's given that a pair of speed cushions, if they are installed in a pair, are about $5,000. It would suggest then that we would be able to install about 10 sets of speed cushions per year, which we envision will be about 2 projects per year with this funding. And I do want to clarify that there's a difference between the speed cushions that we are seeking to install and the speed cushions that you find in parking lots. So we have the picture up here on the top of the screen that has more of the speed cushions that has been designed for the space and to curb the behavior that we are seeking to remediate. So driving above 20, 25 miles per hour. And then below you see your typical parking lot speed cushion where it requires almost a full stop before creeping over. And so that's not what we are talking about. We're talking about a more designed and a more purposeful installation given the space and the behavior that we're trying to support. And then there will also be the possibility of bump outs, pavement markings, and signage changes with the typical resident-led installation. Next slide, please. So then we've had some conversations as staff as to what should this policy look like. And just to give you some ideas of some of the back and forth that we've had, we wanted to include a removal process. But we wanted to make sure that the funding that we are putting forth towards traffic calming was going to be used efficiently. So we wanted to make a process that made it possible, but not too easy, so that like when we would put in a traffic calming installation, we didn't want it to risk it being removed immediately because change is often difficult to approach. The annual cycle versus on demand, we felt that a consistent process, which would allow for predictability and for staff who are running it, to be able to provide that for potential applicants. There seems to be a seasonality with people who are worried about speed non-compliance behaviors that tends to be in the spring and in the fall. And so we felt that we could best serve that in the beginning of the year for the purposes of funding or allowing us to identify how much funding we needed for each of these projects, as well as to help provide a conduit for action among residents. And then, is it too complicated? So I do feel that the process is nuanced. There are 2 processes instead of 1, but most residents will only be interacting with the resident-led, which has less barriers to entry and implementation than the current policy has. Next slide. And that's the presentation. Questions, comments?
If you could unshare, that would help.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I understand there's at least 1 amendment prepared here, but I'd like to have an initial round of questions first. Are there any questions for Ms. Rickvile? Councilmember Piedmont-Smith?
Yes, thank you very much for your excellent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Piedmont-Smith, I forgot that there is a committee report on this. Ms. Rosenbarger, can you?
Sure. Sure. So the Transportation Committee met October 7th, and we went through this presentation, asked questions, and then recommended this to Council 400. The summary of that is in the addendum that was sent out today, if you want to skim through that or read through that while we ask questions and talk about this. So we mainly focused on the need to, calm illegal speeding. And this is about cars that are driving too fast with posted speed limits, on streets across the city, and that the existing program hasn't been successful in getting any street calming, I think, for the most part, because the barrier to entry here has been too high. So we, for the most part, like the changes in it. Let me see. I did say, I questioned one of the numbers, and I'll talk about that in my amendments, but just that I wondered if having to get the lesser of 51% or 24 signatures might be too high. The 51% might be too high for places where we might want this that don't have that many homes, and I'll show that later. But so we talked about that a little bit at the committee meeting. I would say we all liked that there are two processes here, so that staff will be using the bicycle priority network. Is that it? Bicycle priority network to select traffic calming projects, and then there'll also be what is essentially a grant application process that residents lead on their own. And I would say the rubric that was presented for, I would again say extreme transparency and how those resident-led projects would be scored is also very good.
Thank you. We're going to go now to questions. I saw Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to just ask about you, Ms. Rickbile, you said there were some internal discussions about a removal process, and staff decided there should be one, but it shouldn't be too easy. So what is the removal process, or is that still in the works?
Let me pull that up quick. I believe it requires signatures from a majority of residents. And then it also requires a 7-year waiting period between when the traffic calming has been approved to when a neighborhood could take steps in order to have them removed. And then let me just pull up. This could have updated. Of course, there's like 7 files that all have similar names. Okay. And then I think that also needs to be approved by the Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I suppose this was in the longer document that we received, so I apologize. I missed it.
It's okay. Yeah.
Is there any recourse if, sooner than 7 years, if within a couple of years there are obvious negative traffic impacts, for example, for the neighborhood, or emergency vehicle impacts that were new or unexpected? Is there some way, in case of an unusual situation, where an effort could be made sooner for removal?
Yes. So we have another clause, I guess, within the policy that says that the planning department, we can make changes if there is a situation which we find is an issue of public safety. So if by installing a traffic calming installation, which is something that we don't envision would happen with much frequency, but it is possible that that if we feel that that installation and it being there presents a risk that is higher or presents a risk to public safety, then our department staff has the ability to go in and make changes in a timely way, but it requires the I believe it's the city engineer to follow up within 180 days to present why that change needed to happen, as well as if there are changes and modifications just after placement of the traffic calming policy, we do have the ability to make minor changes, which includes like the location of the cushion devices as well.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
If you could please unshare. Thank you. Further questions from members? I see Councilmember Rallo.
Just to follow up, my question was about before implementing some change, will you solicit input from fire, ambulance, CMT, police before something is implemented?
Yes, that is in step 2 of both, or step 2 of the staff-led process, and then shortly after the applications of fundable projects come in for the resident-led process.
Okay, and I had another question, may I?
Mm-hmm.
Please.
Well, it had to do with, we made a change in having bicycles allowed on sidewalks a couple of years ago, and I know of a couple of crashes that involve pedestrians and bicyclists. Do we keep track of that data?
I believe we, cyclist and pedestrian crashes, or
Yeah.
are you talking, oh, so a cyclist hitting someone who's walking?
That's right, on a sidewalk. Yep.
That's a good question. I don't think that we do. I know that these are very rarely reported, if at all. And so any data that we might have, if it is between a cyclist and a pedestrian, I would say I would question the representation of that data, given that we know that there tends to be people who just don't report those instances.
I see. So in other words, that data may not be obtainable. So you're implying that, unless it's reported, obviously, but I mean, these two incidences were pretty severe. So it would be interesting to know. I don't know if it, obviously, if it goes unreported, if the person doesn't report it, that's problematic. But, you know, again, going back to, you know, a bicycle is a vehicle, and impacting a person who's walking, especially elderly, can be pretty severe. But in any case, I'll have to maybe follow up with you on that. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll add just a little clarity. This is Beth Rosenberger. We just have two ways. I mean, basically, we get crash data from the state, and that is from police uploaded crashes. So that would be how we could find out about a crash, and then otherwise, if someone tells us. So we have a U-Report system that could be used for that. People also report near misses in U-Report, which is useful as well, since you don't have to have a crash for a situation to be dangerous. But yes, we wouldn't have a way of knowing other than those. So it would require somebody reaching out to tell us if the police weren't called to report this crash.
Okay, thanks.
All right, further questions? First round questions? I see Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. Actually, I was just wondering if someone could define affected housing units that are impacted by the traffic calming installation. How is that defined? Is that just the residents or housing units in that particular block of the street? Or
yes.
So it's not taken into account since it's part of a neighborhood?
So the way that we have affected housing units defined is it's the residents and property owners of record that are located within 2 lots, but not to exceed 300 feet of streets that are affected by the proposed traffic calming installation.
Okay.
It's the same definition for outreach used by the Plan Commission. And that's kind of how we based it in this context.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Scamboluri.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Rickbottle, can you put that back up?
Sure, that's Beth, but yeah, she's the one who's
sorry,
me
Beth.
with the slides. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Beth. I just want to follow up on Councilmember Sims' question and double check my understanding here. So residents and property owners of record located within 2 lots, not to exceed 300 feet, of streets affected by the proposed traffic calming. So if XYZ Street is considering a speed cushion, everybody on XYZ Street is considered an effective housing unit, and residents on surrounding or adjacent streets, as long as they're within 2 lots, are included. Is that correct?
It depends on the defined area. So say, for example, it's just 2 blocks of a certain street, then it wouldn't be, so say, for example, if it was House Street, it wouldn't be, if it was just for 1 or 2 blocks of House Street, we wouldn't measure all of House Street for the purpose of this program, just the blocks that are surrounded where that map has been identified in the application.
So in a sense, you would take a speed cushion and kind of draw a circle around it with a 300-foot or 600-foot diameter, I guess.
Well, the neighborhood residents would create the map. Okay. And then as long as it is on the street typology, which is intended for this program, so the residential street or the residential connector, then we would be able to create a map from there and then determine the boundaries for the affected housing units.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And also I appreciate, I didn't even start by saying this, but thank you. This is very exciting, and I so appreciate the hard work you've done on this. Could you talk a little bit, you mentioned the Bike Ped Commission, but could you also talk about ways in which you've involved the public in shaping this new policy? I know that HOAs are very active in the district I represent, so I would be interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah, so in addition to working on writing the policy for the past 1.5 years, I also worked on 2 initiatives to try and have traffic calming passed, or the navigating the NTSP, which is for the neighborhoods that are surrounding Summit Elementary School, and then the neighborhoods surrounding Broadview. And I talked about those in the presentation. I live in Broadview, so I was able to kind of see all of these processes from the 3 different aspects of how all of these sort of traffic calming processes are sort of revolving around my life. And so I had this really interesting sort of ability to go and talk to my neighbors after the fact, after we weren't able to get it passed, and talk about how difficult they felt that the process was, or how they felt that, you know, getting 146 people to sign signatures just really, like, for merely just installing 8 speed cushions, it just really didn't feel like it matched sort of the level of participation that they felt that they wanted to have for a process like this, considering that speeding is the illegal behavior. So there was that, and I do talk to about 3 to 5 residents in a week. There's some seasonality, but that's about 100 to 125 people who are at wit's ends, and they feel like they have issues with speed noncompliance in their neighborhoods, and they feel like this is a risk for them, it's a risk for their children, and walking them through that process of everything that needs to happen, you can kind of start to feel the people begin to be demoralized and feel like this is really onerous. And so ultimately it was because of that I decided that I really wanted to work on making this process something that could actually work to empower people to make their streets safer.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, good job.
Thank you.
Okay, first round questions, Councilmember Rosenberger.
Thanks. I have a question about that traffic calming project in Broadview. I guess 2 of them. Okay, you said you needed 146 signatures, so there were about 300 households.
Yes, there were 146 times 2. I'm sorry, my math. It was almost 300.
It's really fine. Just something like that. It would be like just under 300, I think. So how many did you collect?
We collected As far as signatures from Broadview, or not Broadview,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Countryside,
On
I
the
believe
Countryside.
we made that requirement of 146.
Oh, you got that many?
We did get the signatures. It was the ballot that was the sinking ship, metaphorically speaking, that we were not able to meet that criteria in either instance of the neighborhoods surrounding Summit Elementary School and Broadview.
Okay.
Clarify really quickly, the current process requires 2 instances of 51%, correct, Mallory? That in the beginning, a petition to request the traffic calming with 50+% of
51%.
households, 51, and then later a ballot that has to be returned, and that 51% yeses must be returned, not just ballots where it could be that more are still in favor, but yes. So the request for calming and then the voting.
Okay, I see. So you got 51% of the affected homes to say we are interested in this traffic calming project, but then 51% did not return ballots that said, yes, we want it.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other, Councilmember Smith.
The process begins in this November, Ms. Rick Beal.
That is correct. Presuming it passes, of course.
Oh, sure. And the notice to people in the different parts of the city to know about this program, how is that going to happen?
So that would begin in January. And so essentially, I will be emailing the neighborhood associations. I have a list of everyone who has contacted me about traffic calming, and I've asked them, would you like to be notified in the event that we are able to have a new policy and that we're open for resident-led projects? And so sending out an email blast. Of course, we have social media, and our Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission is also really good about getting the word out. So that's how I would approach it. But then if there's things that I feel that are oversight, of course, I'd be happy to make sure that we have, press releases going out to the paper and as much outreach as I can do.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I know there's some really excited people near where I live that are really fired up. So
yeah,
great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Any more first round questions before we go to amendments? Seeing none, I'll open the floor to amendments.
Thanks. Do I need to move to introduce it?
Yes. Yes, you do.
Yes, I move to introduce Amendment 1 for Ordinance 20-17.
Second.
Is there a second? We have a motion and a second.
Thanks.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I've made just one little slide because I was talking about numbers and I thought it would be easier to see it instead of just hear it. So could I share my screen?
Please do.
Okay. Okay, let me make it bigger. Okay, that's as big as it gets, I think. Okay, so this amendment changes one number, and it's definitely something I want to just have a discussion about with my fellow council members. So it's the part that says, in order to apply for this process in the resident-led process, you need the lesser of 51% or 24 signatures. So I thought the 51% still posed a barrier when you're looking at small projects. So I'm recommending to amend that 51% to 30%. And in this table, I just went ahead and did some examples of what the 51% looks like versus the 30%. So if you look at the top table with the requiring 51% or 24 homes, whichever is less, if you look at a street that is has 25 homes in the affected area, if you had to collect 51%, that would be 13 signatures, or you could, collect the 24 signatures. You would opt for that 13, I think, and that is still 52% of the affected homes. So based on the existing program that we have, that is a really high barrier to get a resident-led application into the process. And the numbers still don't look good for a street that is about 50 homes. And we had an example of this in the Transportation Committee meeting. 50 homes is about the number of homes from Howe Street, from Rogers to the west end of Howe Street. That's about 50 homes. So 51% would be, of course, 26, or you could opt to collect the 24, and 24 is a little less, and that would still be 48%. So for those type, like smaller projects, it would be still a pretty heavy barrier to just be able to submit that application. So if you look at those numbers with the 30% or 24 homes, whichever is less, with the 25 numbers of affected homes, you would need eight signatures if you were collecting up to 30%, and that is about that is 30%, sorry. And then if you needed 30% of 50, that would be 15. And that looks a little better when you compare it to larger street projects of something like 100 homes, or something more similar to what Ms. Rickby was talking about, where there were over 200 homes. So in the Countryside example, with let's just say that was 200, they only need 24 signatures, and that would be 12% of the folks living along that affected area. So I think by lowering that percentage, you just kind of like level the playing field for smaller streets, and you don't penalize smaller projects. And just with my bullet points, I just wanted to make it clear too that getting these signatures just gets you into the process, and that the Planning and Transportation Department has a really, I think, amazing, transparent rubric to score these projects and to see what looks best for moving forward. So it's really just being able to submit a grant application with these signatures. And I just kind of compared it to the neighborhood improvement grant process, where those are grants up to $20,000, and you don't have to get neighbors to sign anything to submit an application. So even with us requiring, I think, 30% or 24 homes, we're still getting a good amount of neighbor input here just to try to make sure people follow the speed limit. And so I like the idea of trying it out with a lower percentage. That's my spiel. Questions about that? Yes. Do I call? I don't think I call on you. You're on mute. Steve, you're muted.
We can't hear you.
I couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I couldn't hear Steve.
Are there can I hear from staff? The staff response to the amendment, Ms. Rickby?
We support so we talked about it today, and I mean, 30% is an arbitrary number, just like 50%. So we're happy to have it 30%, and if we need to change it, we can.
Very good. Councilmember Rallo, you had your hand raised for questions on the amendment.
Yeah, it just goes back to kind of a basic confirmation that So we're referencing that speeding is occurring, and planning and transportation, you're going to do, you're going to lay counters, and you're going to find out if that is indeed occurring, right, to validate any application that traffic calming is necessary, correct?
Correct. Well, we'll use traffic speeds and counts for 5 years before the application.
I see. And what is the threshold
For
to
speed data?
confirm that speeding is occurring?
Oh, it's based on the rubric. It is every mile per hour over the speed limit, and it's basically times, I think, 0.2 points. And so then that is added with like crash data. So if there's a crash within the zone, so that's, I believe, 10 points for every crash. And if there's a crash that's on the outside of the zone, I believe that's 5 points. And so the points, the higher that the speeds go at both the 85th percentile and the 95th percentile, will bring in more points for that part of the rubric. That rubric has not yet been established by the BPSC. The one that I provided is what we are providing the BPSC as a model to go from.
I see. So that's going to be adopted. That model is going to be adopted by us or by you?
By the Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission in November.
I see. Will it come before us?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So we're going on a proposed metric that hasn't been adopted?
Well, I think the rubric that I've provided, I mean, that we've talked about the main performance objectives that we are trying to look at. So we've provided both the prevalence of vulnerable road users and how do we find, based on census block data, to what extent does that exist in this area? And then we have the prevalence of behaviors that are likely to cause harm to road users. And so that is the crash data, that is the speeding, the volume. And so those are written into the policy to say that those two things must exist in the rubric. And so we have decided to allow the BPSC to define how that looks, because we wanted to make sure that in the event that we feel that the rubric isn't prioritizing projects, or if we find that there are issues, like if, something terrible should happen, how are we able to respond to that? We felt like the BPSC was the best commission to be able to deliver that rubric.
Okay, so just to, so one difficulty I have is, maybe you could provide assurances, is that, it's a difference between the mean and the median. If there are outliers and speeders, if there's an occasional high speeds, vehicle going through, does that, as opposed to, say the majority of cars going through are speeding, how does that affect the evaluation of speeding per se?
Well, if it's an outlier, there's really little that we can do I think that the instance that, say there's like some sort of race in the street, like that's not exactly the behaviors that we are attempting. Like, this is an imperfect net that we're trying to be able to find the areas that are most appropriate for traffic calming. And so the 85 and the 95 percentile, based on conversations that I've had with our engineering team, seems to be the best indicator for how these behaviors exist, barring something that is, as blatantly dangerous as, racing down the street. And my hope would be that enforcement would be called in those situations.
I do want to point out we have an amendment on the table about reducing the percentage of votes. So let's keep the general discussion to after the amendment. Mr. Rowell, do you have any questions on the amendment?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, other than trying to grapple with exactly, what the metric is. Thanks.
Got it. Okay. Further questions on Amendment 1? Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I think I get where this amendment is going or trying to go. As with regarding the barriers to apply, I guess my question would be if we lessen that barrier in order to apply, then does that take the residents in those affected housing units, once it apply, are they out of the approval process at that point, and then that shifts to staff approval? Does that make sense?
Can you repeat the question for me?
Well, I guess I'm wondering if you take lesser folks to even apply, and that gets the application into the process, then where does that leave the residents in those housing units? Once the application's in, are they basically no longer count, and then staff takes over the approval process? And I guess where I'm going with that, if the affected housing units, as been defined, are smaller than a neighborhood, if we make that smaller, then why not still seek the majority of those within that smaller area, which still doesn't include the entire neighborhood, you know what I'm saying? But it still builds a consensus, and it still takes a majority of a smaller area that we're starting with in the first place. So what are your thoughts on that? And I guess that'd be to Councilmember Rosenberger. If that makes sense.
Right, okay, yes. Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, you're asking if it's on 2 blocks, why wouldn't we want 51% or something? Or if it's on 4 blocks, I mean, it's basically up to 80 households. That's when it flips to being better to do the 24. But I think it's because it's important to me that people have a low barrier to get involved, and one reason I changed it to I want to change it to 30% is that I think about sort of where people speed, and it can tend to be in places with it's usually wider streets, more space, right, where you feel more comfortable moving fast, and it might be in neighborhoods where you don't know your neighbors very well, or it might be the case that people wanting to make this change don't have a lot of time to knock on a lot of doors. I mean, door knocking, you tend to get 15 to 25% people even opening the door. That's from canvassing. But so I think it takes a long time and a lot of effort to get folks to open the door, and I think that getting 30% of the vote of the folks affected can be a big number anyway, and that's enough, I think, to just apply and then have planning and transportation decide if this is a good match, right, and if this project meets the criteria that would lead to traffic calming installation.
So 30, well, so that makes sense, but 30% of the residents or the folks within that smaller affected housing unit, 30% can now make the decision for either 100% of those housing units or not even meet the 51% threshold, which kinds of in my mind, it kind of takes away the input in that smaller area, or the majority in that smaller area. It kind of makes sense if you're talking about an entire neighborhood and a little short street within that neighborhood. But if you're talking about the street that you're trying to get application in, and then reduce those housing units to 30%. That just don't seem, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's because, okay, like.
I mean, if you're only talking about 30 houses, then why can't you get 16, for an example, in that little small area, whereas that entire neighborhood may encompass 300 people. So therefore, you know, the 16 is really deciding in that smaller street, except for it's the majority of the folks in that affected housing unit. And everyone else in the neighborhood is still left out of that decision-making, at least to apply process. Does that? It just seems like some people are being left out, is what I'm saying.
Like like the program in general is focused on those affected areas. So like, right, really people who live outside the street, like on the street, right, where these things will be installed. So
I'm just talking about the effect. I'm just talking about the affected housing units, which is smaller in the first place, if that makes sense.
Right. I think it's helpful for me to look at it both ways, on a big street and on a small street, to sort of, I think, make this point that on a little street, right, you have fewer people. So I don't think fewer people necessarily means then we need a higher percentage of them to agree. Because when we have a street with 200 people, we have decided it is okay to only have 24 agree. And that is 12% of the people living in the affected area. And so I think if we say only 24 need to agree on a street with 200, then we should also say, like, it leads to the same conclusion that 8 people is enough when we have 25 homes, because that is still 30% when we are saying 12% is okay somewhere else.
Well, and potentially when we're talking about 200 units, for an example, I thought part of the definition had to do with 300 feet either way or 2 city lots, for an example. So I'm not so sure how that can encompass an entire area that's 400 houses. I'm not being critical of what you're hearing. I just need clarity. And it seems as though we're taking some of the people out of the process, you know, not 100%. But an additional 20% over the majority are being discluded or not being included, is what it appears to me.
I think because this is an application, like basically a grant application, I think that we should encourage applications, and then, right, like then the rubric takes over on where this makes sense. And so I think it is important to just encourage that engagement and involvement with a lower barrier there, similar to our other grant processes.
Okay, I think I have. Thank you both. Questions on the amendment, Councilmember Scambaluri.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on this amendment. And I like the idea of empowering people to take a greater voice in what their neighborhood looks like. So thank you for that. I appreciate Councilmember Sims' questions though. And I want to put a finer point on it. So 24 people on a street of 200 can move this project forward, can get a speed cushion or whatever. So let's look at the flip side. What exactly would it take to stop it? Would it take 30 residents reaching out to planning and transportation saying, wait a minute, no, those 24 want it, but we 30 don't? What would it take to stop something once the 24 signatures are accumulated? Does that question make sense?
I think that one's for me.
Well, we're still on the amendment.
Right, and I would feel better about the amendment if I knew that there was a process in place to stop it. If a majority of residents said, wait a minute.
I think it might be for Ms. Rickfile that, I mean, regardless of how many people have to approve it, you are asking how would it be stopped? And I do want to just say this is to apply, not to have anything installed. So, but Ms. Rickfile, if you want to talk about that part of the process.
Yeah, that's correct. So assuming that the application is received, and we can go forth in collecting the data, then and only then, like, will we be able to fund 2 projects per year. So, and after that, there is going to be a hearing, which people who are going to be or who live in affected areas will be invited to come to the BPSC hearing, where we're going to talk about the problem. And if they feel that, say, for example, a traffic calming application that has risen to the level where it is likely to be funded, has been put forth in bad faith or punitively, then that is something that the BPSC can take into account and not approve that project.
So what if it wasn't done in bad faith or punitively? They just disagree with whether or not it's necessary.
Right. That is information that the BPSC would likely take into account.
Thank you.
Councilmember Morello, again on the amendment, please.
I think Councilmember Piedmont Smith that was before me, but.
Councilor Piedmont Smith, you haven't yet asked. Okay, no. Go ahead, Mr. Rello.
Okay, just to clarify, because I'm very interested in this discussion, Councilmember Scandaluri has voiced my caution about this a little bit, but what exactly is the affected area? Could you define that? What does that consist of?
That is residents and property owners of record located within 2 lots, but not to exceed 300 feet of streets affected by the proposed traffic calming installation.
Okay. I see. All right. That's
okay. Are there any other questions on the amendment? Amendment 1. I don't see any. Okay, let's go to the public for comment on Amendment 1. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on this? Please state your name. Who's our first one, Mr. Lucas?
First up, we have Greg Alexander, who should be ready to comment.
Hi, thanks. I'm Greg Alexander. I mean, this is a great amendment. It's a great proposal all around, and this amendment improves it. I mean, the risk here that you're a little bit worried about is that what if just some anti-car nut jobs in the neighborhood, just a small tiny minority get together and then are able to push through a traffic calming plan that wrecks the rest of the neighborhood for everybody else. And I can't imagine any scenario less realistic, because traffic calming, I mean, it's literally getting people to obey the speed limit is the goal of this program. If you think that it wrecks the neighborhood to have people following the speed limit, I don't care if you are the majority, you should be disenfranchised from that decision. Safety is not something that should be put up by to public referendum. Safety is an essential city service. And if 30% of the neighbors on my street, which it would be very hard for me to get 50% of the neighbors on my street. I live on a busy street, and accordingly, most of my neighbors don't interface with the street as pedestrians. They don't talk to people that come to the door. They don't, you know, I've canvassed this neighborhood. It's a hard neighborhood to canvass. And so, I mean, how much burden do you want to put on neighbors to say, I would like a safe street? I think a small group of neighbors should be able to ram down their neighbors' throats a safe street. I think a safe street is not an evil that we need to avoid. I don't understand any sort of concern saying that some silent majority of neighbors actually prefers to speed. They probably do if you actually look at their behavior in their cars. People, when they do get in their cars, even people who really support traffic calming, when they get in their cars, they speed, especially if the road design encourages it. And we had in our transportation plan, the draft plan called for calming Walnut and College and 3rd Street by turning them into streets again instead of a divided highway. And that got just a little whisper of public opposition at the time that was in the Plan Commission, and that just got yanked out of there. We're letting an angry mob take safety out of a plan. Well, how many pedestrians have died on 3rd Street and College and Walnut since that was yanked out of that plan? Three pedestrians have died there. We owe people safety, and just the standard process, the old neighborhood transportation safety plan said that we had to have 51% of the neighbors say they want safety, and then after they see the design, we need 51% again to say they want safety. That's ridiculous. Safety is not a 4-letter word. Safety is not something we need to carefully avoid pushing on the unwilling. Safety is something we owe to every single member of the city. Safety is not something that is a downside risk to activist policy. So I resent the line of questioning here that we need to be worried about this plan going too far. We need to be worried about more people dying on our streets is what I'm worried about. And I can't believe you're worried about anything else, because we've had 3 deaths just in the last, 15 months, just right downtown. And this plan will help prevent that from happening in our neighborhoods. It really will. And we should do everything we can to push this plan along to make it bigger and stronger and more powerful. I just cannot believe the suggestion that we are going to inconvenience neighbors by making them take 3 or 4 more seconds to drive down a neighborhood street, and therefore we should try to limit the scope of this program. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Next commenter, Mr. Lucas.
Next up, we have Katie, who should be unmuted and ready to comment.
Can you please state your full name? Can you say your full name, please?
Yes, it's Katie Yoder. And
thank you.
Right now, we are only commenting on the amendment, and there will be time later to talk about the whole.
That's correct.
Okay. Great. My name is, like I said, is Katie Yoder, and I am in Park Ridge East, close to Morningside Drive. So I'm one of those excited people Councilmember Smith mentioned. But for now, this is, of course, new to me, is I paid really close attention and just wanted to add a quick comment about Councilmember Rosenbarger's amendment. And wow, that makes me so excited. Just in seeking support along Morningside Drive and houses within 300 feet, that is incredibly daunting. And just to make this process more accessible, to even just start, to save some postage stamps or door knocking during a pandemic. I mean, I don't know how else we would do it. This just sounds so great, and lessening the barrier is so important. So just to talk a little bit more about how this amendment could affect, could help the process is, so tonight, right before this meeting, probably around like 5:45, I was running in my neighborhood with my 2-year-old in a stroller, and a car came flying down probably 40 miles per hour down the street. And Miss Rick Biles' graphic that she showed at the beginning of the meeting was just terrifying, thinking about the injuries and deaths that happen, and increase beyond 20 to 25 miles per hour. And living in one of these neighborhoods that are a post-1965 neighborhood with the streets built for the giant 1970s cars, even with the sidewalks, it's so scary to think about our kids becoming the age where they're old enough to bike in the neighborhood. It's not the stranger danger. I'm afraid they're going to get killed by a car going 40 miles per hour. And just thinking about what Councilmember Rollo said about, outliers in this process, doing traffic studies and stuff like that. It's going to be an outlier that's going to kill somebody, not the average of 26 miles per hour or whatever. And I think that anecdotal participation from residents is going to be an important part in this process. Just last week, I'm sure Councilmember Smith saw this in our neighborhood Facebook group. It was sounding off because somebody was drag racing down Morningside at probably 10 p.m. at night. And I think it's important to note that people are going to know, speeding is more concentrated in certain parts of neighborhoods, and it's going to be unnoticed by those just driving through to get to their neighborhood or their house at the back of the neighborhood. So to give the people who are out walking on the streets or biking a little bit more even footing in trying to even just start the process is so helpful. Like, me noticing a 40 mile per hour driver with my 2-year-old on the street like that, I'm going to notice that more than someone who's commuting, just driving through the neighborhood. So I understand why it's important to make the process easier to apply. I think about, from what I understand, the neighborhood improvement grants don't have to have input from all the neighbors. So why would this be any different? It's only an application at this point, and it just makes it less onerous for those just try. All I want to do is start the process and see, let the data show what should happen next. It's not, I'm going to go install speed bumps once I apply. I want to say there's a problem and there aren't many people who care about it yet, but what can we do to make the process a little bit easier to get there? But a little bit more later. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on Amendment 1? Second call.
There is a public comment. I'm not sure it pertains to Amendment 1. It's from Sam Dove. It's a short comment. I'll go ahead and read it. I'm not sure if he meant it to pertain to this amendment. Sam wants to know why the trash people throw the trash can on lawns and says that's not okay to do.
He's right that that's not okay, but it is not relevant to this amendment. So we thank him for his comment. Any other final comment from the public on Amendment 1? Seeing none, we'll come back to the council for follow-up questions. Are there any follow-up questions, Councilmember Varela?
I have a comment.
Any questions? All right, seeing no questions, we'll go to debate on Amendment 1. Councilmember Varela.
Well, I agree. I'm happy to support a threshold of application that's lower than 51%. It doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome will be assured. And I think there'll be time in the process if the objection says that it's not necessary or that it is, just to address Mr. Alexander's comment, I think he's missing the point, and that is that, this is a process and, first of all, there are limited resources. And so we need to apply the resources where it's most important. So putting in traffic calming in a place where it's not necessary would be, if it's a zero-sum game, we're taking it from somewhere else. The other is what the outcome might be, and that is, that I've seen traffic calming that have design elements that have made things worse, not better. And so to have people be able to participate in a design process and be content with it, I think is a very important aspect of this. But the amendment, I think, is a good one. And I appreciate Councilmember Rosenberger bringing it forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rallo. Further comment on Amendment 1? Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, I favor lowering that threshold as well. I think it makes it easier for people to participate in government and begin to see what happens and to try to affect some change in their lives. So I'll be supporting this amendment. And thank you, Ms. Rosenberger, for putting it together.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Further debate from members? Seeing none, I'll say briefly that the fatalities that Mr. Alexander referred to are one of the reasons why I voted against the budget. I was dissatisfied with what I thought was a reduction of focus on transportation in the 2021 budget. I certainly don't think that the staff of the as yet still called Planning and Transportation Department have taken their eyes off the ball. And I'm very glad to see this ordinance coming. And I also agree with others who have said that it doesn't make sense to have such a high bar, an onerous bar for even applying for this sort of thing. I mean, in the past, there have been neighborhoods that wanted traffic calming because they didn't want anybody passing through their neighborhood. This is different. This is calming to prevent speeding. And there also used to be problems in neighborhoods with people who said that we shouldn't put barriers because we prevent fire trucks from getting into the neighborhood. And that, unfortunately, is the way that Mr. Alexander's argument about safety can be turned on its head. In the name of fire safety, we made the roads super wide and super fast. And a lot more people die from or get injured from cars than they do from fires because we have a pretty thorough fire response. We shouldn't be widening our roads for fire trucks any more than we should be building our churches for Easter Sunday. So, I think that, with that one caveat, I generally agree with him that, where are our priorities? Why are we worried about the privilege of cars going through neighborhoods? They should go at the pace that the neighborhood feels. As long as they meet state law, the minimum standards, this is what we want our city to be, I think. So I support the amendment. There's no other debate. We'll call for roll on Amendment 1. Okay, will the clerk please call the roll on Amendment 1?
Yes. Councilmember Sims?
Pass.
Volin?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Scambolari?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
By my count, that's an 8-0-1 vote. That amendment is passed. We come back now to the legislation as amended, unless there's another amendment that I didn't see coming. Let's come back to the ordinance as amended. Is there any second round of questions about the ordinance? Seeing none, we go to the public for comment on the ordinance as a whole as amended. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to the ordinance as amended? Mr. Lucas.
Yes, Katie, and excuse me, I forget your last name, but Katie would like to speak again, and you should be ready to do so.
Thank you. It's Katie Yoder. Sorry, I could not figure out how to change my name on my Zoom account, so sorry about that.
Welcome to 2020.
I know. Again, thank you for your time. And I am excited in our neighborhood. We have, before we moved in, there was a committee that was seeking to have some traffic calming on Morningside Drive. And we're kind of we have a small committee trying to revamp those efforts again. And so just thank you so much to Mr. Iqbal and the work of the planning department, because this is just, I'm so excited that it seems like there might be light at the end of the tunnel in the next, 5 years when our kids are in elementary school or something. But it's been really interesting to read notes passed of this committee in our neighborhood. I read a complaint against traffic calming that said, no one has ever died or been injured in our neighborhood due to a speeding car yet, so why do we need traffic calming? But I so appreciate the city being proactive in protecting pedestrians and cyclists. I mean, we're just as equally as important as the cars that are on the road and just as important users of the city streets. We in our household strive to be carless. We have one car, but when we go into town, we think about, should we take 3rd Street? Should we take 10th Street? What's the best way to get downtown? And it's those greenways that are a little bit safer than those options. And Morningside Drive has sidewalks, but there are currently no protections for cyclists, even with the sharrows that presented as a greenway. But we still have those 40-mile-per-hour cars flying down those wide streets. So anything to promote this for us Far East Siders to get downtown without a car, all those parking problems downtown, it's just so great. And my husband in normal life commutes to campus via Greenway, but I'm most fearful when he's biking or when we're biking with the kids and we cross over to Smith Road onto our own Parkridge East. It's the speed on Morningside Drive is insane. It's crazy walking. We're about equidistant from the 2 playgrounds in Parkridge and Parkridge East. And I feel safer walking through Parkridge without sidewalks with traffic calming than I do on a sidewalk walking to the playground in Parkridge East. Safer than in Parkridge than Parkridge East, which is crazy. You think we built these sidewalks, they're supposed to keep us safe, but not with cars and buses flying down. But I think something that I hadn't even taken time to think about that came up tonight in Ms. Rickbile's presentation is that I've got a whole lot of privilege and time to be able to spend on this, trying to start the process as a stay-at-home mom, but I hadn't even thought about the inequity that comes along with the process we have currently in place. It's just incredibly onerous on residents and doesn't seem to have a good track record of making improvements. And, who does the current policy hurt the most? Who does it help the most? And it just is a bit car-centric. And I think that as a city, from everything that I've read, we're trying to get away with that, or get away from that, and try to make, pedestrians and cyclists as equally important as cars are on our streets. So anyway, that was a little bit rambly because I didn't know I'd have to comment twice, but thank you for your time and consideration. And this effort is just incredibly important in making our streets safe and accessible to more than just cars. So I appreciate all the work on this.
Thank you, Ms. Yoder. No one has to comment twice. That's advice I should take myself. Who's the next person who wants to speak, Mr. Lucas?
Next up, we have Greg Alexander, and should be ready.
Mr. Alexander, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I'm Greg Alexander. This is a awesome proposal. I just want to highlight how valuable it is to not have a citizen veto of the traffic calming design. Safety is an essential service. We shouldn't be taking away safety because of neighbor concerns. And kind of just an anecdote to motivate this, and in the Green Acres Neighborhood Association, which is where my mom lives, they have a perennial traffic calming problem on Hillsdale. It basically connects 3rd Street to the bypass. I think there's not a single stop sign in between those two. And so people cut through there at a high rate of speed. And it's exactly like in the photos that Ms. Rickbile showed with, it has a very wide road. It has inconsistent or mostly no sidewalks. It has a long sweeping curve across the whole thing. And so people drive on that road very fast. And in the neighborhood association mailing list, they're always complaining about it. Every 6 months, somebody brings it up. And so one time they're talking about it and they start just hypothetically, well, what if the city installed a stop sign at 7th and Hillsdale? And at that point, the conversation blew up. There were people who said, no, if you install a stop sign there, it will take me extra time to get home in the evening. And I'm not willing to give that up. And this program probably wouldn't even really install stop signs. I'd like to think that it might at the fringes. But at that point, they lost the support of those members who said this stop sign will be a big inconvenience in my life. And so on the one hand, we've got my mom. She doesn't drive, and so to her, it's a no-brainer. She's got a different material interest. Her material interest is, I want to survive the walk to the grocery store. That's very selfish of her, because it's not about her neighbors or the neighborhood. She simply wants her own self to survive the walk to the grocery store. And her other neighbor who drives has a different interest. He wants to get home about 5 seconds faster. And that's a selfish interest also. He doesn't care about killing my mother. He only cares about getting home 5 seconds faster. And you as city government have to weigh these two interests. One man wants to get home 5 seconds faster, and one woman wants to not die on the way to the grocery store. Well, it's even trickier than that, because at the beginning of the conversation, when people were saying, oh yeah, somebody's got to do something about it, that guy who wants to speed, who doesn't want to stop at the stop sign, that same guy said, there's too many speeding people on my street. We need to slow this street down. People in the abstract always say, you need to slow this street down. The speeding is too much. But then when it starts getting into this more physical process, they're like, oh wait, no, you're going to slow me down. And they're suddenly against it. And so it is absolutely essential that we replace the old process where once people had that knee-jerk reaction, oh my goodness, don't slow me down, that they then get to derail the process. So I'm so excited for this, and I hope you are too. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment on this ordinance?
Yes.
Mr.
Next,
Lucas,
Jim Shelton.
please go ahead.
Hi, Council. Again, Jim Shelton, just speaking for myself. I know this is anecdotal, but my son's best friend and the young woman who introduced him to his wife lost their her one-year-old daughter, who was being towed by her partner's bicycle up in Ypsilanti, Michigan, just a couple of months ago. I support this. I think this is a really good approach. I was here when we put the initial one into effect, and I know it was really controversial, but it's calmed down and everybody's used to it, but it's too hard to use. But one thing I want to say is there needs to be some upkeep of whatever it is you do. I drive on Covenanter a lot. Those speed bumps, I know where they all are, so it doesn't bother me, but the paint's all gone. You can't tell where they are. I'd hate to be driving some kind of a big rig through there, moving somebody. You can't. There are people who need to almost come to a stop to go over those things, and they need to know they're there. And we're not keeping them up, and that's probably not your problem. Maybe that's Adam Watson's problem. I don't know who it is. But that's something that needs to be addressed. If you're going to do a bunch of this, they need to be kept up. But this is a really good proposal, and I encourage you to do it in memory of this little girl. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on this ordinance? I'm afraid I don't have the numbers in front of me. Is this ordinance 2017? Yeah, ordinance 2017. Last call for public comment. And we'll bring it back to the council for final questions or debate. Are there any final questions? Councilmember Scambaluri.
Thank you. I appreciate Mr. Shelton's question about the need for upkeep. And I was wondering if our planning transportation staff could comment on that. Once we install a speed cushion or whatever, how do we budget for that and how do we plan for that?
So I believe we've talked with Adam Wason, and he has said that we would need a separate fund for upkeep because this is an additional expense.
I'll clarify real quick. It's just something that we have discussed, and Public Works is aware of the process. We've vetted with them, and they know anything part of the streets and public realm has to be maintained. Covenanter in particular is one where those are sort of not the best representation of a speed cushion we would install today and in need of some upkeep, but that street probably is one we would also redesign in terms of the traffic calming there, and that might be part of the delay when we're debating, do we improve what's there while we can, or since we know we want to change it a bit, wait to do that. But yes, Public Works they're on board and funding will get figured out. Thanks.
Thank you.
Further final questions? Seeing none, we'll go to debate. Is there any final comment on Ordinance 2017 as amended? Councilmember Rollo.
Yes, I want to express my appreciation, Ms. Rickbell and Ms. Rosenberger, for your work on this. I think this is a really important step forward because in my years, I've seen some neighborhood traffic calming been turned away when it was needed. And I think this process is going to be much less onerous, in the words of Ms. Yoder, for bringing proposals forward. I think we're going to have to anticipate more resources brought to it. I think that speed tables are one method. I think there are more expensive ones, probably. And so I'm curious to see what the volume is and what the proposals will be, and making sure that we accommodate budgeting for it. But overall, I think this is an excellent strategy. So thanks for your work on it.
Thank you, Mr. Rollo. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I want to thank Planning and Transportation staff and Ms. Rick Beal, did I pronounce that correctly? Rick Beal, I'm sorry, as well, for all your hard work. And this is a needed ordinance, and something I think we all look forward to. With some of the comments, maybe some others out in the community don't realize that all of us live in neighborhoods as well. My discussion with the amendment, although well-intentioned, I think was headed in the right direction, was more process-based, having to do with individuals in that affected area. So was it against that? There was a couple comments. I just won't repeat them because I don't think they add any value to this conversation. But it had to do with, in my mind, the process, including those that are in the affected areas. It made sense to not include the others where that don't affect right now, but to have a minimum amount of folks in an already reduced area as far as a process didn't make sense to me with that amendment. But the ordinance itself, I think, is right on, spot on. It will get more people involved in the process, as some of my colleagues have said. And I still think that we'll have further discussion about it. I thought there was one thing that was brought up, like you can get it started, but how can you stop it, or how can you have other discussions about it? I think that'll come up in the future as well. But I think this is well-meaning. I think it will help the neighborhoods, and I look forward to supporting Ordinance 20-17. Thank you.
Thank you. Further debate on 2017. Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, thanks. I actually had a question as well. I popped my hand up kind of at the very end.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. It's okay.
I'll start with a comment, which is thank you, Ms. Rickbile and Planning and Transportation staff. I really appreciate your initiative here in identifying a barrier and a shortcoming in our process and working to fix that. So thank you. My question is with kind of in the vein of what Councilmember Rollo was asking or commenting on about resources and need. And I'm wondering in particular if we can keep the council or the transportation committee, I guess all of us, abreast of the process in terms of how many applications there are, what staff identifies as need, and what that funding gap or shortfall is from what we're able to budget each year, just so that we're aware of unfunded safety improvements and how we might be able to address those in future budgets. So I don't know if there's a particularly good way to do that. but if we can build that into the process and approach in some way, some sort of, if it's an annual circle back with council or whatever it is, to let us know on that front, that'd be great.
Yes, so the current policy has us evaluating our traffic calming. So with new speed data after the installations have been provided, as well as to share information about what projects applied but were unfunded. And so all of that information will be shared openly, and we'll make sure that you get that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I'm also excited about this new program, and think this is an excellent example of, identifying a problem and changing the system in order to address that problem in a better way. Safety really should be our top priority, especially for vulnerable road users or users of the right of way. I also really like the aspect that there's going to be some set criteria and methodology. Those are going to be announced publicly, and those are going to be applied equally to all proposals that come forward. And so we're really using a methodical, data-driven method to determine whether traffic calming is warranted. And I also appreciate the lower threshold for just bringing an issue of safety on our streets to the city. As was mentioned many times, the current process is very onerous, and this way, I think if two or more neighbors feel that there's a problem, they can relatively easily bring it to our attention, and it can be analyzed and acted upon. Just within District 5, I know that Allendale Drive has been problematic with the speeds in that in Sherwood Oaks. And so I think there'll be a lot of interest when this is launched in January, as we've heard from other neighborhoods as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other debate? Councilor Scambaluri.
Thank you. Thanks and bravo to all of you for this very good work. I'm actually writing it into my constituent newsletter right now. And Ms. Rickbile, I just sent you a message saying, can you come to my constituent meeting in a couple weeks? Because you don't have enough to do, so I'll just
absolutely anytime.
Thank you for that. And it's not often I just echo what one of my colleagues says without necessarily adding to it, but I just really appreciate Councilmember Sims' comment that as council members, we have to attend to process. And we have to ensure that even those who may have different priorities or who may disagree with us can have a voice too. And please know that I think in most cases here, at least, if not all, then that's what was driving our interest in the process and how people might express different opinions around a particular end. That said, well done, all of you who worked on this. And I look forward to supporting it. Thanks.
Thank you. Further debate? Anybody else have a comment? I want to say just a couple things. First of all, thanks to Ms. Rickball for remembering the Special Committee on Street Design and Engineering Standards from 2012. I've forgotten how much we had concluded when we did that work. It was a summer's work, Councilmembers Ruff and Speckler and I. And I'm glad that it has come to something good, because this program was so godforsaken for so long. My God, the bureaucracy. I mean, any update would have been better. This is a very good update, and it's being done for the right reasons in the framework of a new transportation plan, which is in turn part of the framework of a new comprehensive plan. But just the sheer, regardless of what side you were on, the sheer bureaucracy of the program was eye-glazing to any council member that I knew. And I'm happy to say that to see what I see is a much more efficient program that does what Councilmembers Sims and Scambaluri pointed out, which is make sure that it protects people's interest, whether they agree with the calming or not. I think one of the reasons that this program had such a problem in the past is because as Mr. Alexander said, there were people who opposed traffic calming because of, wanting to get somewhere a little faster. They didn't want their cars to be stopped. And I don't think that that's where anybody who spoke tonight was coming from. I don't hear that kind of argument anymore. I think people get the idea that, cars maybe dominate streets a little too much, that they go a little too fast. I think more strongly than that, but at the very least, most people think at least that much today. So kudos and thank you, and I look forward to supporting it. Any other comments before we take a vote? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on ordinance 2017 as amended?
Yes, and before I call the roll, if I can just say hello to one of our young watchers, Kendall. Hi, Kendall. Okay, and next we'll start with Councilmember Volin.
Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
Scambaluri.
Yes.
Rosenberger.
Yes.
And Sims.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sounds like a 9-0 vote to me. Thank you, Ms. Rickbile, Ms. Rosenberger. Good luck implementing the new program and burying the old one. All right, let's go now to legislation for first reading. Madam Parliamentarian.
Mr. President, I move that ordinance 20-18 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Yes, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yes.
Scambaluri.
Yes.
Rosenberger.
Yes.
Sims.
Yes.
And Volin.
Yes. That motion carries. Will the clerk please read by title and synopsis?
Ordinance 2018 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending chapters 1512.010 to add several stop signs, 1512.030 to add a hybrid beacon signal, 1532.080 to add several no parking zones, 1532.100 to delete several loading zones, 1532.100 to add a loading zone, 1537.020 to delete several streets from Zone 8, and 1537.050 to add provision about the timing of permit sales. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance amends Title 15, Vehicles and Traffic of the Bloomington Municipal Code, and comes forth at the request of city staff and the Traffic Commission. The ordinance makes the following changes. It adds stop intersections to South Addison Lane at West Countryside Lane and at South Delia Star Drive to South Delia Star Drive at West Countryside Lane and at West Sunstone Drive to West Eventide Drive at South Addison Lane and at South Delia Star Drive to South Flat Rock Road at South Addison Lane and to West Sunstone Drive at South Adams Street. It adds a new pedestrian hybrid beacon signal at the crossing of South Walnut Street and the Beeline Trail. It adds a new no parking zone on West Pinewood Drive from South Walnut Street to South Pinewood Lane on both sides of the street. It deletes several loading zones from the municipal code that are no longer in existence and corrects the time restrictions for a loading zone on West 4th Street. It deletes the current residential neighborhood Zone 8 as that zone was absorbed by other zones by a previous ordinance. It clarifies that the Parking Services Division has the authority to begin the neighborhood parking permit sales process for the upcoming year at any time.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I move that ordinance 20-20 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
Motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Yes. Councilmember Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Scambalori,
Yes.
Rosenbarger.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. Sims,
Yes.
Volan,
Yes.
and Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Okay.
Will the clerk please read by title and synopsis?
Yes, ordinance 2020 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code to establish a community advisory on public safety commission. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance is authored by council members Piedmont Smith, Rosenbarger, and Flaherty, and amends Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code to create an 11-member community advisory on public safety commission. This commission would, among other duties, research and make recommendations to the Common Council and the mayor on matters of public safety.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I move that ordinance 20-26 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Yes, Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Scambalori,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Volan,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
and Flaherty.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Will the clerk please read by title and synopsis?
Yes, ordinance 2026, an ordinance authorizing the acquisition, construction, and installation by the city of Bloomington, Indiana, of certain extensions and improvements to the city sewage works utility, the issuance and sale of revenue bonds to provide funds for the payment of the cost thereof, and the collection, segregation, and distribution of the revenues of such sewage works and other related matters. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance authorizes the city of Bloomington to issue its sewage works revenue bonds of 2020 in the aggregate principal amount not to exceed $32 million. The 2020 bonds will be issued to finance the first phase of modernizing the Dillman Road WWTP, my apologies, I don't know what that stands for. The replacement of the existing storm culvert system of the Jordan Culvert and pay costs of the issuance of bonds.
I believe it's wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah, I just sounded that out. I got it.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move that ordinance 20-27 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second. You're muted, Steve.
Well, we have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Yes, Councilmember Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Scambalori,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Volan,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
and Smith.
Yes.
Motion passes. Will the clerk please read by title and synopsis?
Ordinance 2027 to amend Title 10 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Wastewater. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance amends the Bloomington Municipal Code Title 10 at Chapter 17 to expand the types of fats, oils, and grease, also known as FOG, devices acceptable to CBU in its FOG program. In an effort to reduce the overall economic impact to the food service industry for complying with the FOG program while increasing cooperation in the FOG program. These amendments also establish a new permit program, which requires all FOG hauling services to first apply for and receive a permit from the CBU before engaging in any hauling of FOG waste in the city. The permit program is free and contains an educational component to educate the FOG hauling industry on best practices for cleaning and maintaining FOG retention devices, as well as best practices for hauling and disposing of FOG waste. This program is intended to increase the effectiveness of FOG retention device maintenance, which will, in turn, increase the effectiveness of the FOG retention device in keeping FOG waste material from entering the wastewater collection system.
Thank you. With that, we now go to additional public comment. If there is anyone who has not yet spoken who would like to speak on an item that was not on tonight's agenda, this is an opportunity to do so. I see at least one person who would like to do that. Mr. Lucas, would you?
Yes, first up we have Maquiba Reese, who should be able to unmute herself.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Maquiba Reese. I am an advocate in the community, and I work for IU, the Kelley School of Business, and I'm happy to be here. I just wanted to talk in regards to Ordinance 2020 that was introduced tonight. So I shared
I'm
with...
sorry, ma'am. I'd hate to interrupt, but that is an item that is on the agenda. We're not talking about it at all tonight. That we're not going to bring it up until committee next week. So I'm not sure it's appropriate to speak about it tonight.
I was told that I can speak about anything.
Except if it's an item that's on the agenda. Do you understand? Like this was an item that was on the agenda. It was first read just now.
Okay, well, I can clarify what I would like to share and just in general. I can just make a general statement.
Thank you.
So generally, I would like to address the fact that including minority voices is really imperative in the infrastructure of any initiative if it's specifically for people of color. And so that's my main concern with a couple of different initiatives that's taking place in Bloomington. A lot of people like to use Black, Indigenous, and people of color without actually including us in the infrastructure of creating any type of initiative. And it's very vital that we're a part of the infrastructure, meaning the beginning planning stages, before thinking of us as an afterthought. And I'm really wanting to make sure that we clearly do that. And part of my position as a diversity, equity, inclusion, justice practitioner is that we include people's voices before we actually make any type of initiative, because that is what we call white centeredness. And we need to no longer move in that direction. We need to make sure that we create spaces for people such as Black, Indigenous, people of color, and not just use us as a tool or try to only speak to one person and not an entire group of us, just because we might disagree with someone's suggestions. So my thought is that we make sure that initiatives are not white-centered, and the way that you do that is by looking around you and making sure that we're part of the solution and not an afterthought. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other further additional public comment? Mr. Lucas?
Yes, we have Alex Goodlad next, who should be ready to comment.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to speak kind of last week and recap the budget that was passed. And I guess first off, I want to thank everyone that did end up replying to my emails. And I owe you guys a reply. I'm glad it's not the other way around. So I want to kind of just express my disappointment, let's say. I don't want it to be all doom and gloom, especially in these times, but I'm very kind of disappointed on how, we all agreed, I think, that especially when back in, like, rewind to when we talked about, gas masks with Chief Dekoff trying to make the case for them that, there wasn't a reason to have them. And I don't think there was a good reason to have rubber bullets either. But in any case, I think we all agreed that gas masks were kind of dumb because we agreed that crowd control in that sense is just a danger to the public. It doesn't create public safety. So the fact that there wasn't even an amendment that got rid of them made no sense, even if we're going to have an ordinance that bans the use of tear gas on protesters. And I would very much I very much urge I would very much urge Isabel Piedmont Smith and Matt Flaherty to hold that end of the deal. And I'll be like I'm going to reply to the email shortly. We'll kind of look forward on this and not too much into the past. But I do want to express my disappointment on that. And also on this ordinance banning the use of tear gas, I don't just want it to be an ordinance, quote unquote, banning the use. I want it to be something that is, a blanket ban on crowd control in general, has no loopholes like with the loopholes with the mask ordinance. I'm not talking about the gas masks. I'm talking about actual face coverings for COVID. Seems like loopholes are abused. So we don't want loopholes with this ordinance that we bring up. And one more thing. Sorry for rambling a bit. I want to kind of second what McQuaid was saying, and I think that we do have to bring people of color voices to this conversation. Especially, it's important for their rights to protest and to speak on reform of the police, which is a very touchy subject, and we need their voices, and we need them to feel welcome in the process, which it hasn't been good on both the city and the county level in the past. So I hope that they're involved in the process, and we get some real tangible policy together in light of the unfortunate killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And I yield my time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Last call. Seeing none, just a couple of procedural points. First of all, it's important to note that because nobody is discussing a given ordinance this evening, since it was simply introduced, that we're trying to. Other is I neglected to refer the new legislation to committee. Ordinance 2018 will be referred to the Transportation Committee, which will be meeting at 6:30 next Wednesday. Ordinances 2026 and 2027 will be referred to the Utilities and Sanitation Committee, which will be meeting at 5:30 next Wednesday. And Ordinance 2020 will be referred to the Public Safety Committee, which will meet at 8 p.m. next Wednesday. So 5:30 for Utilities and Sanitation, 6:30 for Transportation, 8 p.m. for Public Safety, to give plenty of time for that discussion. With that, we go now to matters of council schedule. Mr. Lucas.
Just two upcoming to remind the council of this week. The first is a Jack Hopkins committee meeting tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. That committee will be going through a second review of applications and making pre-allocation decisions ahead of the allocation meeting, which is scheduled for Monday of the following week. On Friday, we also have a council work session currently scheduled. There are 2 possible items that the council could hear about at that work session. And as always, I'd like to hear from council members whether they would like to hold that work session and whether they can attend. The 2 items are the end of the year appropriation ordinance, which is an annual piece of legislation that comes forward to the council that essentially allows the departments to balance their books, move money around, and many of those actions require council approval. The other item is the creation of an engineering department that follows from the budget discussion that the council just had. And as far as I know, those are the only 2 items that are ready for discussion. So perhaps council members could indicate by a show of hands whether they might want to attend a work session to hear about those items.
Who would like to attend a work session? I see majority, so let's go ahead and schedule that meeting it's this Friday at noon.
And those are the only matters of schedule that I've got tonight.
Councilmember Scambaluri.
Yes, could you repeat the times for the committee meetings? I missed the transportation one.
Yes, utilities and sanitation will meet at 5:30, not to exceed 45 minutes. Transportation will meet at 6:30, not to exceed an hour and 15 minutes. Public safety will meet at 8 p.m. and they have as much time as they need.
Thank you.
It's up to the chairs of each committee to bring it in on time or take as much time as they need if they're not limited. Any other questions or concerns? If not, I want to thank everybody and I'll call for motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank everyone. Good night.